Chapter 674. It's all right. This is a rare gathering. Anyone wants to go in with me? Yi Ziwen's eyes glanced at these individual cultivators. Although it was Yi Shiwen who rescued them just now, they were all dodging eye contacts at this time when facing Yi Ziwen's eyes. They did not dare to enter with Yi Shiwen. Everyone knew that Yi Shiwen abolished the martial art of Thousand Plants Sect's true legatee disciple. It was a great offense for Thousand Plants Sect. How could Thousand Plants Sect not retaliate? In the eyes of Yi Shiwen, Thousand Plants Sect's scale was at most comparable to the last few ranks of the top 100 legatee of true martial school, but in the hearts of these individual cultivators, it was already gigantic. Thousand Plants Sect's thunderous revenge was about to come. Wouldn't entering with Yi Shiwen now be equivalent to admitting that they were on Yi Ziwen's side? They would be avenged as well at that time. So they didn't want to take the risk. Just when Yi Shiwen was about to go in by himself, he saw Yang Tingyu gritted his teeth and came forward while saying, "Senior, let me enter with you." After witnessing Yi Ziwen's strength, Yang Tingyu changed Yi Ziwen's title from Brother Long to Senior. He didn't know that Yi Shiwen was not as old as him, but even if he knew it, it was okay. In the cultivation world, the most important thing was strength. As long as one had strength, his age or seniority was not important. Yi Shiwen looked at Yang Tingyu surprisingly. He didn't expect someone dared to follow him at this time. He was confident enough to protect himself, but this was not the case, at least in the eyes of others. Yi Shiwen was an individual cultivator from the outer region. He would not be able to compete against Thousand Plants Sect, even if he was powerful. The concept of individual cultivators being no match against sects was deeply rooted. Even if those individual cultivators in the elderly predecessor level of cultivation had scruples on the sects, it was still only scruples. They dared not provoke the sects if it wasn't anything crucial. Following Yi Shiwen to go in at this time had a feeling of bearing life and death together. Therefore, Yi Shiwen was surprised as he did not expect it. "Come in with me then," Yi Shiwen said to Yang Tingyu. As for other individual cultivators, he didn't look at them again. From his point of view, this was the so-called opportunity. If they missed it, it would not come again. Opportunity could either be existing or not. Those who could really understand thoroughly and had the guts would have the opportunity to obtain it. Yi Shiwen had encountered miraculous opportunities countless times, but it was also obtained every time he risked his life. Never once it was easy. Without courage, one's journey was destined to be limited in the martial world. Seeing Yi Shiwen being so determined, Yang Tingyu was somewhat relieved. Anyway, Yi Shiwen did not seem to be the kind of lunatic who purposely courts death. Yi Shiwen must have something to rely on. Furthermore, Yi Shiwen saved his life. He would just bet on this once. The two walked all the way into the Medicine King Valley. Originally, this road was clouded by the fog, but now the mountain gate was wide open to enable those individual cultivators to come in. But from time to time, Yi Shiwen could still see glimpses of spiritual senses scanning around him occasionally. They were some disciples of Sage Realm who were on the lookout. At this time, Yi Shiwen and Yang Tingyu were surrounded with a lot of individual cultivators, but they were not the previous group. There were many roads to enter the valley, and they all came from other paths without experiencing the incident just now. A lot of individual cultivators heard that there would be a lot of masters who would come to discuss the truth, so they came from far and near. The masters of Feihong Mansion has arrived. At this time, Yi Shiwen heard a lot of exclaims from the individual cultivators around him. Among the vast star region near Meteor World and Meteor World, the Meteor Sect was naturally the leader. But besides the Meteor Sect, there were still some sects which were fairly powerful and some had great sage presiding. The Meteor Sect disciples were the same as the people above the Celestial from the individual cultivator's perspective. Even these sects were huge for them. In terms of scale, Feihong Mansion was even larger than that of Medicine King Valley. The people had a whole new level of respect for them. Isn't that Guan Rue, one of the top 10 true legatee disciples of Feihong Mansion? He can be ranked as the top 3 among the younger generation disciples of the Feihong Mansion. Although Feihong Mansion is not an alchemy cultivating sect, Guan Rue is the legatee of alchemy cultivation. Guan Rue is really exceptionally remarkable to stand out among them, and rank among the top 10 true legatee disciples. Now he is in sage realm great perfection. There is hope for him to be a great sage in the future. But look at the old man before Guan Rui. Is he one of the supreme elders of Feihong Mansion and Guan Rui's master, Tian Batong? Everyone looked at them and saw a group of people stepping on the light approaching. The first person was an old man with white hair and youthful face. He had a fair face and his eyes were shining. His vital energy and blood was very vigorous. Everywhere he looked was like shone by candlelight. Others couldn't see it, but Yi Shiwen noticed it. This was the sign of a great sage. Only a true great sage could have such vibe. Although Yi Ziwen's current cultivation was enough to defend against a great sage, he couldn't exhibit the same signs. Moreover, Tian Butong's cultivation had entered the peak of the great sage intermediate, and might leap and attain great sage late any time. Behind him was a young man in purple clothes. He had extraordinary demeanor, and was super handsome. Obviously, he was the Guan Rui that the people were talking about. In Yi Ziwen's eyes, Guan Rui's cultivation was already in sage realm great perfection. It probably wouldn't take long before he could step into half-step great sage. Gosh, even Tian Batong came this time? I originally thought that it would be good enough for them to send an elder in sage realm casually, but I didn't expect that Tian Batong would lead the team personally. We are really blessed this time. Since Feihong Mansion is already led by a great sage, then the others, Thousand Plants Sect and Medicine King Valley, will not be weaker than this formation. They come together to discuss the truth. Even if we are just fortunate enough to hear one or two sentences, it will be extremely useful for us. After everyone saw Tian Batong, they were extremely excited. For these semi-sage and a handful of sage realm individual cultivators, a great sage like Tian Batong was just like a celestial deity. They were simply legendary characters, who were generally impossible to meet. Even Yang Tingyu, who was next to Yi Shiwen, had a blushed face after seeing this Tian Batong. Tian Batong was well known among the individual cultivators in the Star region. His existence was like deities and immortals. For a warrior who cultivated alchemy like Yang Tingyu, the significance was even more extraordinary. Yuan naturally didn't understand. To him, he was nothing but a great sage. There was nothing special. This is a worthwhile trip as I can see Tian Batong and Guan Rui this time. Yeah, meeting in person is much better than just hearing such a famous name, especially Guan Rui. His cultivation is less than 300 years, but he has reached the level of sage realm great perfection. We may not have this opportunity in this life, but every one of them enjoyed exceptional advantages. Hey, comparisons are odious indeed. The surrounding individual cultivators let out a big sigh. Compared with these sect disciples, they were unremarkable like weeds on the roadside. Not everyone had the same fate indeed, but they were just lamenting for a while, because the masters of Feihong Mansion had already entered the Medicine King Valley by stepping on the light. They could fly in, but these individual cultivators still had to go in by walking. Everyone entered the Medicine King Valley, and the whole valley was extremely huge. Not sure how many miles was the circumference. Everyone was at the plaza after entering the Medicine King Valley. On a typical day, this huge plaza had a misty appearance covered by endless spiritual energy. Countless Medicine King Valley disciples would sit with both legs crossed and cultivate here. Of course, they were all junior disciples. Prominent disciples would have their own cave dwelling and rest area where spiritual energy was more abundant. But at this time, in order to entertain disciples and incoming guests, they were temporarily vacated. Upon entering this place, plenty of individual cultivators quickly used their martial arts to absorb the spiritual energy here. Normally, it would be hard for them to find places with such abundant spiritual energy. Once these places were found, they were definitely occupied by great forces. Some mocking laughs of Medicine King Valley disciple resounded from the surrounding. They seemed to be laughing at these individual cultivators for being inexperienced, and some individual cultivators were flushed with shame following the mocking laughter. However, few people stopped because of it. For them, cultivating for an hour here was almost equal to their usual agonizing cultivation for a whole day. They thought in their hearts, no wonder these major sects' disciples' cultivation advances by leaps and bounds. This basic condition was not what they could enjoy. Of course, There were wealthy people amongst the individual cultivators. There were always people who had all kinds of miraculous opportunities that made them very wealthy. In fact, they were many times richer than ordinary sect disciples. This scene reminded Yi Shiwen of the time when they first went to the Yuan sect headquarters. It was a similar dumbfounded expression. It was also exactly the same. Thinking about the past, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but grin and chuckled lightly. He felt that many eyes were fixated on him, especially those of individual cultivators' gaze. It was as if they were looking at an alien. Yi Shiwen was like a giant among the dwarfs in this group of individual cultivators. He did not have the slight inferior feeling like these individual cultivators. He was proudly independent. Yang Tingyu beside him was much more outstanding than others too. It seemed like he was afraid of embarrassing Yi Shiwen, so he tried to maintain his grace. Even many of the Medicine King Valley disciples looked at Yi Shiwen in surprise. Although they were not as bad as the fatty named Zhou before, they somehow despised those individual cultivators as well. However, they were somewhat impressed by Yi Zaiwen's demeanor. Chapter 675. Master, it is him. He is the one who abolished Brother Zhou's martial arts. Master, you have to seek revenge for Brother Zhou. A resentful voice echoed from the fog all of a sudden. A group of people was seen to appear suddenly from the dense fog formed by numerous spiritual energies. It was a large team consisting of dozens of people, which was not worse off than the previous Feihong mansion. The black-shirted old man who headed the team had a thin body, and he looked slightly angry. He walked with majestic steps without concealing his aura at all, like a violent hurricane. He turned out to be a great sage whose strength was not inferior to the previous Tian Butong. However, his vital energy and blood was less vigorous than Tian Butong. In Yi Zaiwen's view, the frail old man had a hint of decaying aura within him. Yes, a stream of well-hidden decaying aura. This was the aura of a person on the verge of death. Yi Shiwen was confident that he wouldn't read it wrongly. Unlike ordinary people who grew old slowly, warriors could always maintain their optimal and most vigorous state because of their cultivation. But that was only during the Golden Age. Once a warrior entered the last period of his life, he would begin to fall into the angel decay. One state suddenly. His body would also reveal a decaying aura. According to Yemo, everyone had to go through this process unless they reached the longevity realm. Obviously, the old man in front of him had entered the angel decay state. This meant that he would die soon. Although this soon might mean 10+ years or even decades, he was indeed entering the end phase for a great sage with a long life. He was indeed entering the end phase. Behind him were dozens of disciples, and among them were those disciples that were scared away by Yi Shiwen just now. Judging from their dressing, they were obviously the disciples of Thousand Plants sect. When that group rushed out, it attracted the attention of many warriors around. Aren't those people from Thousand Plants sect? Didn't they enter the inner Medicine King Valley already previously? Why did they come out at this time? What's happening? Many people didn't know why the people of Thousand Plants sect stormed out aggressively, but they still made way for the group of people in order to avoid being mistakenly injured by these seemingly mad Thousand Plants sect disciples. Is that black-shirted elderly man the supreme elder of Thousand Plants sect, Gongyang Yongfeng? This time, the leader of Thousand Plants sect is Gongyang Yongfeng indeed. Rumor has it that the pellet to break through the great sage level by Medicine King Valley has shocked even the top people of Thousand Plants sect. Although Thousand Plants sect is incompatible with Medicine King Valley most of the time, they attach great importance to this issue. Yeah, this is the first time Gongyang Yongfeng stepped out of the Thousand Plants sect in the past 50 years. I heard that Gongyang Yongfeng is reaching his ultimate limit soon. He never walked out of the sect in the past 50 years in order to train his successor. He accepted a disciple and trained him wholeheartedly. Everyone's vision shifted towards the gaze of Thousand Plants sect, and it turned out to be the individual cultivator with outstanding aura just now. Yi Zaiwen's demeanor, which was different from ordinary individual cultivators, made everyone remember him immediately just now. They wondered what incident made Thousand Plants sect so furious. Master, it is him. He is the one that abolished Brother Zhou's martial arts. He even said that he would like to see what kind of sect teaches such a disciple. A young and emotional disciple looked at Yi Shiwen with resentful eyes. He just fled in front of Yi Shiwen earlier after witnessing his senior brother's martial arts being abolished, and he couldn't do anything. This was a great humiliation for him. Now he finally found his master, and could teach a hard lesson to this brat who underestimates others' capabilities. Are you the one who abolished my last disciple's martial arts? Gongyang Yongfeng's face was ice-cold and ghastly pale. He said while staring at Yi Shiwen. He looked like a tiger who could devour someone at any time. When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but to gasp. Everyone originally didn't know what made the people in Thousand Plants sect so angry, but they did not expect that this was the case. Everyone knew that the Gongyang Yongfeng's position in Thousand Plants sect was very high. In fact, it was slightly higher than the sect lord. Because of his towering seniority, he was already the supreme elder of Thousand Plants sect when the current sect lord entered Thousand Plants sect. Not to mention that now, almost all his contemporaries had already withered, except for him. Everyone was also very clear that the Gongyang Yongfeng's ultimate limit was approaching, so the people were more tolerant to him normally. This kind of person who was about to die was not afraid of anything, and he had no concerns. Once a person offended him, there might be scruples usually, but now he was about to die. What was there to be concerned about? He was simply unscrupulous. These people also had their own trigger button, and Gongyang Yongfeng's trigger button was his last disciple, as everyone knew. Because he was on the verge of death, he poured all his energy into that disciple. It could be said he taught his disciple everything that he knew, as this was his last hope. The hope in which he passed down all his legacies. Everyone knew that even if they were going to mess with Gongyang Yongfeng, they should not mess with his disciple. Not to mention his martial arts were actually abolished. No wonder Gongyang Yongfeng looked like he was about to explode with anger. That last disciple was his last hope. Now the disciple's martial arts was abolished by Yi Shiwen. It was like shattering all his hopes. The consequences of shattering all hopes of a dying man were unimaginable. Particularly, the disciple who Gongyang Yongfeng was committed to train. Even if the disciple was not capable, he was still a master in Sage Realm. But this individual cultivator actually abolished his martial arts. This was simply a mind-blowing miracle. Most importantly, this person didn't leave, and even dared to come over. Is he crack-brained or brain-dead? Yi Shiwen nodded gently without denying. He whispered in his heart, no wonder that the fatty named Zhou was so arrogant and domineering. He didn't respect people at all. Turns out he has a great sage-level master. In a typical force, this was indeed enough to be rampant, just like Xiaoya who entered a transcendent realm sect previously. Especially this Gongyang Yongfeng who obviously appeared in angel decay state. Yi Shiwen also understood that it was the worst to offend this dying person because they no longer had hope. So they were more reckless in doing things. Normally, people would tolerate and wait until this old man was dead. But that was not Yi Zaiwen's personality. The fatty named Zhou was so arrogant. Perhaps it had something to do with the pampering of this Gongyang Yongfeng. After seeing Yi Shiwen nodding his head, Gongyang Yongfeng's initially restrained momentum was suddenly released. At that instant, it was like stormy waves forming in a calm lake. The endless loud coercion was released unscrupulously. It dispersed in all directions with Gongyang Yongfeng as the center. His only beloved last disciple's martial arts was actually abolished by Yi Shiwen. It was like earth-shattering news for him. Because he knew that he was running out of time, so he was more focused on the cultivation of this disciple. He even did his best to cultivate his disciple with the hope of passing down his legacy. Although he was late in accepting his disciple did not disappoint him anyway. He cultivated to be a sage realm in a short time. With the preparations he left for contingencies, it was very probable that his disciple could even enter Great Sage in the future. But now someone had shattered this hope. His disciple's martial arts was abolished. He examined the injury already, and there was no possibility of recovery. This was equivalent to someone blowing out his dreams. Most importantly, the remaining time was simply not enough for him to continue to find a successor and cultivate talents. The burning anger in his heart was like a volcanic eruption, all spreading out in all directions. Those surrounding warriors, be it Sage Realm, Semi-Sage, or Legend, immediately knelt down from the shock of the horrifying aura outburst, as if they met their own king. In the face of the horrifying aura resulting from a great sage's violent rage, they were like little white rabbits shivering in fear when facing the roar of a furious old lion. They were shivering in fear and unable to move at all because their bodies were stiffened. The coercion from his spirit made them feel somewhat suffocated. The people of Thousand Plants sect were of no exception. The furious Gongyang Yongfeng did not consider them at all, and perhaps did not even take them to heart. He had no interest in anything else except for his last disciple. It was already so terrible to be swept away by this stream of momentum. They were trembling with fear. It was impossible to imagine Yi Ziwen's condition, who was suffering most of the coercion. Yi Shiwen was like a small boat in a rainstorm. It seemed like it would sink any time, but it persisted forever. Yang Tingyu next to Yi Shiwen had already pushed his cultivation to the extreme. He was ready to die. Even if the great sage thought that he was basically like an ant, being overly ambitious to attempt something impossible, but since he chose to come in, he was mentally prepared for death. He just didn't expect that by being at Yi Ziwen's side, the boundless and horrifying aura disappeared in front of Yi Ziwen's body. He still looked calm and relaxed, as if the stream of horrifying aura was not existing at all. Yang Tinjia's eyes were full of inexplicable shock. What is the origin of this Senior Long whom I accidentally encountered? Gongyang Yongfeng is a great sage. For them, a great sage was undoubtedly like a celestial being. Even with just his aura, it was enough to completely crush a half-step great sage. Those who could escape from a great sage were all elites. This Senior Long even resolved the coercion of a great sage casually? Is he a great sage too? 1 https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/the_dk_of_the_angel. Chapter 676. Good. Very good. Gongyang Yongfeng said it again and again. His complexion was already pale, and his gaze was burning in anger that it could set the sky on fire. His last disciple's martial arts was abolished. Although his disciple did not die, it was no different from death in his heart. There was no difference at all. His whole life's hard work was completely ruined at this moment. He never thought that the reason behind such a calamity would also be related to his pampering of his disciple on normal days. If it wasn't for his usual pampering of his disciple would not be so arrogant and domineering, bullying the weak for fun. Then it would not have caused Yi Shiwen to attack. He just thought it was the fault of the person in front of him. From a certain sense, his disciple and Gongyang Yongfeng actually shared the same origin, and were tarred with the same brush. The disciple's behavior naturally reflected the teacher's behavior. It was the eternal truth that similar people fit well, and birds of a feather flock together. Your disciple is just seeking his own death, Yi Shiwen said while sneering continuously. Gongyang Yongfeng was actually a great sage late master. After all, he had experienced countless years of cultivation. Logically, Yi Shiwen was most probably not his match, and Yi Shiwen could only escape. Unless Yi Shiwen summoned Star Beast Avatar, then there was a possibility of defeating him. But Gongyang Yongfeng had now entered the angel decay state. All aspects had fallen from the peak state, and suddenly plummeted to an unprecedented declining state. His whole body was shrouded in a decaying atmosphere that ordinary people couldn't see. It seemed like he just managed to maintain the status of Great Sage Intermediate Peak now, and it would change over time. It might even continue to decline continuously. This was the normal life of aging and death. When the angel decay occurred, warriors who never encountered aging and death in their entire life would suddenly go through a lifetime of aging in a short period of time, before dying completely. If you are counting on him to continue your legacy, then you should give up earlier. Then you don't have to jump out of your grave later due to anger. Yi Shiwen laughed mockingly at the Gongyang Yongfeng's insight of selecting his successor without holding back. He actually chose such a person to be his legatee. Although the successor did not have to be a great philanthropist, at least his mind must be mature and firm. A person like his disciple was like a flower which grew in a greenhouse, unable to withstand any difficulties. He looked mighty, but he was just a paper tiger. Yi Shiwen didn't care about him at all. Ah, Gongyang Yongfeng was about to be angered to death by Yi Shiwen. Not only did he abolish Gongyang Yongfeng's favorite last disciple, he even mocked recklessly here. You are courting death. Gongyang Yongfeng swung one of his hands, and the whole ground surface shook violently. A huge wooden spear penetrated from the ground below, and went straight to Yi Zaiwen's feet, attempting to pierce through Yi Shiwen into half. This thousand-plant sex martial technique was simpler compared with Medicine King Valley. They constantly cultivate all types of spiritual fruits, celestial materials and rare treasures. The plants were mostly sold to Medicine King Valley and other alchemy cultivating sects in exchange for various other resources. Yi Shiwen screamed, and his eyes were full of fighting intent. Since pushing his cultivation into the peak of half-step Great Sage Intermediate, he still didn't have the chance to attack and test it completely. Although the Gongyang Yongfeng in front of him only had the peak strength of the Great Sage Intermediate now, he used to be a Great Sage late after all. In terms of combat power, it would probably be enough to defeat all Great Sage Intermediate. After entering Great Sage, very few people could progress cultivation all the way. It was even considered lucky for many people to enter Great Sage. It was very possible that one would not progress one bit for his whole life after entering. Yi Shiwen also believed that his combat power stood at the peak of Great Sage Intermediate. This battle was enough to confirm his thoughts. He even wanted to use this battle to sharpen his skills and break through in the battle. He might be able to break through in an instant. All he wanted now was an evenly matched battle. Golden divinity liquid began to emerge beneath Yi Zaiwen's feet. It was majestic like towering waves crashing down. Kaboom! The golden divinity waves collided with the green wooden spear, and it made a scary explosion sound, as if something was crushed. The green wooden spear broke through the divinity waves and rushed in. Boom! With a roar, the wooden spear instantly turned into powder, and was drowned by the golden divinity waves. Yi Shiwen had the upper hand in the first battle. Gongyang Yongfeng was completely infuriated. As a great sage he had cultivated for many years. In Thousand Plant Sect, his position was almost above all and second to only one person. Even the current sect lord was his junior. It was conceivable that with his position in Thousand Plant Sect, he had always been respected and admired by thousands of people. He had never been ignored and reprimanded like this before. Most importantly, the person in front of him had crippled his beloved disciple whom he regarded as his legatee. He was almost bursting in anger already. He couldn't wait to chomp his flesh. The golden divinity waves under Yi Zaiwen's feet turned into a glimmer of light. He rose up and flew towards the outer universe. He didn't want to fight here because it was a power battle between great sage levels. Even if this was the old nest of Medicine King Valley which probably had many arrays arranged, the battle could still cause a huge damage. This was not Yi Zaiwen's initial intention. You want to flee? No way. Gongyang Yongfeng saw Yi Shiwen was flying away, and chased after him immediately. A green gourd appeared in his hand, spitting out greenwood energy covering the sky. It transformed into wooden spears spreading all over. It seemed like a series of green waves immediately covering towards Yi Yawen. The atmospheric layer of the huge star where Medicine King Valley was located was far from comparable to that of real martial domain. It was not even 1/10 of it. Yi Shiwen just used a fraction of martial arts, and he had already flown out of the atmospheric layer. The wooden spear waves formed by the countless wood energies were also approaching behind him aggressively. Yi Shiwen could make a move with no worries when he was out of the universe. He turned around, and shot out a punch suddenly. A big star was formed, and it slammed down the air with rumbling sounds. It was also like a millstone crushing the air. The wooden spears hit by his fist turned into endless fragments on the spot, and scattered in the universe. Gongyang Yongfeng's movement was also fast. He caught up with Yi Shiwen in a split second. He panicked suddenly because his attack was shattered easily. He originally chased after him just to prepare for contingencies. He never took Yi Shiwen to his heart. Yi Shiwen was just a half-step great sage. How could Yi Shiwen be compared with him? His insight was naturally stronger than those of individual cultivators. He could see that Yi Shiwen was just a half-step great sage at a glance, so he didn't even bother about Yi Shiwen. He was also convinced that Yi Shiwen abolished his disciples' martial arts. He certainly knew his disciple very well. His disciple was just in sage realm. In the face of half-step great sage, his disciple definitely couldn't cope with it. Gongyang Yongfeng just didn't expect to see such a shocking scene when he came up just now. The gourd in his hand was a great sage tool that he had cultivated for many years. Although he had no right to launch it, the scene of Yi Shiwen breaking his attack easily left him stunned for a moment in his heart. However, fury soared into his heart again immediately after that. He despised Yi Shiwen very much in his heart. If he couldn't tear him into pieces, it would be difficult to get rid of his hatred. His entire Buddhist chi was triggered, and a mighty great sage's powerful chi swept out. Those semi-sage or sage realm warriors who caught up later on felt as though the ground was shaking and the mountains were moving. A stream of infinite strength was unleashed. The sky, earth, oceans, stars, sun and moon were all swept away in an instant. Compared with the full outbreak now, the stream of great sage's aura just now was considered nothing at all. During the angel decay, all vital energies and blood would deplete quickly and disappear in a short period of time. Therefore, all warriors usually practice condensing the power of vital energies and blood during the angel decay, so that they would not be discharged easily during attack. Because once they were discharged, it was difficult to replenish and it would accelerate their aging. Just like once a person was injured, he might look as good as before, but he actually consumed the originally stored undivided growth cells. This was also the case with warriors. The vital energies and blood power consumed could be replenished in the previous heyday. But once they entered the angel decay, the more they used, the less would be remaining. This was similar to the previous old sect lord who survived by a special secret method to reduce the weakening of vital energy and blood to a minimum. However, after the last battle, all his vital energies and blood were exhausted. He passed away while sitting cross-legged on the spot, and that was it. Gongyang Yongfeng had unleashed his full combat power now. He was already madly furious without holding back. Swoosh! With a shrilling blast through the air, Gongyang Yongfeng had reached in front of Yi Shiwen. He had completely let go. The speed of Gongyang Yongfeng burning his vital energies and blood almost accelerated to the extreme. Although he was madly furious, he still had some sanity after all. He was determined that Yi Shiwen would not be his match, so he went all out to kill Yi Shiwen. Although attempting to kill Yi Shiwen immediately would consume a heap of vital energy and blood, it was still within his acceptable range as long as it was not a prolonged battle. Pung! The entire universe seemed to be torn apart by his figure suddenly. Gongyang Yongfeng appeared with a wooden spear in his hand. The spear's vitality was exuberant. It was as though the spear was not a weapon, but a heavenly huge tree instead. A vast ancient aura emerged from it. The entire sky had become a sea of wood chi, and it was full of vitality everywhere. In order to cultivate this woody chi, he had cultivated for a long time. If this woody chi was put into the desert, it would be able to let the entire desert be covered with greenery and become full of vitality almost immediately. The power of a great sage was incredible, and even Yi Shiwen couldn't do it. But Yi Shiwen didn't need to be able to do it as long as he had the corresponding combat power. The long spear pierced through the sea of woody energy. It pierced straight towards Yi Shiwen. Chapter 677. Is he a monster? Clang! The light of the sword in Yi Ziwen's hand soared up to the sky. The sword's light tore the sky, and the long sword slipped down instantly, forming a huge ripple mark before it fell down. Kaboom! The long sword and the wooden spear met in the air, bursting into boundless sparks and making clashing sounds. It was an unparalleled clash. Gongyang Yongfeng was indeed a former great sage late master. Although his strength had fallen to a certain level, it was still enough to wipe out all the great sage intermediate masters. His skinny arm had the strength of 10 million pounds that could split the star and universe with one shot. If it was another average great sage intermediate, this move would probably send him off in the air. The difference between great sage intermediate and great sage late was unimaginable. Although Yi Shiwen had reached the peak of half-step great sage intermediate, if Gongyang Yongfeng was still in peak state, Yi Shiwen could only flee unless he summoned the star beast. But Gongyang Yongfeng encountered a freak like Yi Shiwen, and Yi Ziwen's fighting ability was extraordinary. His domineering body, had remarkable strength. If they were in the same realm, he could even completely crush Gongyang Yongfeng. Even though his realm was far inferior to Gongyang Yongfeng, he wouldn't give in at all. "I'm going to tear you to pieces," roared Gongyang Yongfeng. He hated Yi Shiwen so much that his Buddhist vital energy and blood was boiling, and he wasn't stingy to exert any of it anymore. His anger had completely clouded his rationality. He was flamed in anger, and it was basically impossible for him to think about his Buddhist vital energy and blood that was draining. It was not only because of his fury, but also because he couldn't stop. He was in a period of declining vital energy and blood of the angel decay, but Yi Shiwen was in his peak condition. Yi Shiwen was simply stronger after each battle. At first, Gongyang Yongfeng chased after Yi Shiwen, but he soon realized that Yi Shiwen was more proactive than him. With a wave of Yi Zaiwen's long sword, the overpowering wind tore open the sky, which was horrifying. These overpowering winds could even tear the space, not to mention a human body. But Yi Shiwen was different because he had a domineering body to protect his body. With the strength of the domineering body, he had no scruples at all to go all out. Even if he was hit by the spear chi, it would be difficult to hurt him. It would only scratch some white traces on his bronze skin. So looking at it at this moment, it turned out that Yi Shiwen had the upper hand, and he became stronger the more he fought. Countless warriors in the distance could only watch from afar. The battle of two great sage-level characters was so powerful that it could destroy everything. It was hard to imagine. The universe space was constantly cracking when the two were battling. The peak pointed by the tip of the spear or sword would crack like a spider web. With the tip of the spear or sword as the center, it would crack outwards wildly. The skyline seemed to be screaming a devastating cry. Faced with such a horrifying battle, everyone's facial expression changed, as if they saw something incredible. How is this possible? Who is this person? How can this person battle with senior Gongyang Yongfeng without showing any weakness? He is really scary. Everyone was nodding. Gongyang Yongfeng was well known in this area, and everyone knew Gongyang Yongfeng. When they first entered the cultivation path, Gongyang Yongfeng was already a big shot who was very famous. But who was this person who could actually evenly match Gongyang Yongfeng? No, they are not just evenly matched. This person is clearly suppressing the old man. A man exclaimed, but he didn't continue because he saw a lot of Thousand Plants sect's disciples around him were glaring at him. But everyone knew what he meant. Gongyang Yongfeng's battle was more than a tie. There was also a trend of this person suppressing him, because one side was not afraid of death while the other side was cautiously blocking. From the scene, it was Gongyang Yongfeng who attacked less and defended more. It was an awful scene. Darn, if it isn't because elderly predecessor has entered angel decay now where his strength is far worse than before. That person can't match elderly predecessor. A Thousand Plants sect disciple said indignantly. In his opinion, if elderly predecessor was not falling into angel decay now, how could he be suppressed and beaten by Yi Shiwen? It was simply impossible. Many Thousand Plants sect disciples who were surrounding him nodded, and many other sect disciples also nodded. Gongyang Yongfeng's situation was not a secret. Many people knew it. After all, he was already old, and it was normal to fall into angel decay. But don't forget, that person is not a great sage. He's just a half-step great sage, but he can suppress and beat a great sage. Such a horrifying fighting power. Do you think it matters if Gongyang Yongfeng is in a peak state? If you put it this way, then wouldn't Gongyang Yongfeng be doomed if the person is a great sage? At this time, Yang Tingyu was the one who spoke. He saw everyone agreeing to the Thousand Plants sect disciples' words, so he couldn't hold himself from speaking for Yi Shiwen. When he chose to come in with Yi Shiwen, he was already standing on the same boat with Yi Shiwen. Although it was partly impulsive at that time, he also had the idea of betting on it. He was already tired and sick of such a cowardly life. Everyone looked at Yang Tingyu immediately, especially those Thousand Plants sect disciples who were even glaring at him. In particular, those who had met Yi Shiwen in front of the valley before. They even wished to eat Yang Tingyu alive. In their view, if it weren't for these lowly individual cultivators, the subsequent incidents wouldn't happen. Moreover, it caused Brother Zhou's martial arts to be abolished, and even forced elderly predecessor to make a move. All of these were the lowly individual cultivator's fault. They saw Yi Zaiwen's frightening combat power. Even elderly predecessor, who they worshipped like gods, did not stand any advantage in Yi Zaiwen's hands, so they did not dare to blame Yi Shiwen. It was like the ants in the face of gods. No matter how resentful they were in the heart, they dare not blame. But their anger needed to be vented, so they vented to these individual cultivators. If it wasn't because of these individual cultivators, how would they end up like this? They would definitely not think it was their own problem, and would only blame others. But more people thought that this was indeed the case. Although it seemed a bit unfair for Gongyang Yongfeng because Gongyang Yongfeng was not in the peak state, that person was not even a great sage. It was simply a miracle that he could actually fight with Gongyang Yongfeng like this. Putting aside the fact that he could fight a great sage, it would be a super glorious thing even if he could escape from a great sage initial master. In particular, Gongyang Yongfeng, who had monumental prestige and reputation among the great sages. Who is this person? If there was such a remarkable person, it was impossible that they had not heard of it before. They were confident that they would not judge wrongly. The difference between great sage and those below great sage was still huge. The person in front of them had incisive attacks and was unyielding. He did not seem to be worse than a great sage, but they could still see that he was not a great sage. It was just that his strength was comparable to a great sage. This was also what made it even more unbelievable. At this time, even the Thousand Plants sect disciples were speechless. Even if they had thousands and millions of reasons, they could not erase the fact that Yi Shiwen was fighting a great sage as a half-step great sage. Solely this fact left them tongue-tied. Yi Shiwen was more horrifying than Gongyang Yongfeng, who was not in his peak state. Fighting a great sage as a half-step great sage was simply a myth for them. He was just like a myth and legend. No, they never even heard of it before. A question popped out in everyone's mind inevitably. Is he a monster? Otherwise, how could he possibly accomplish things that no one could? With a long sword in his hand, Yi Shiwen was just like a terrifying swordsman. The battle between the two went all the way to the depths of the universe, and every meteorite along the way exploded. The space was full of spider web-like cracks, which were in all directions. There was no distinction of up and down in the universe. All directions were filled with the traces of the battle. The chi of the spear and the sword dispersed everywhere. There were frequent collisions of uncountable spear chi and sword chi. The sparks that burst out from the collision could ignite everything. It was very scary. Everyone was afraid to go close when they saw the scene. They could only watch from a distance. Once they were close, even the spattered chi of the spear and the sword could kill them. Particularly Yang Tingyu, whose face was especially flushed. He watched Yi Shiwen battle excitedly. After he followed Yi Shiwen into the Medicine King Valley, it was like a desperate bet where he put all of his eggs in one basket. He even thought of it as repaying Yi Zaiwen's gratitude. He was considered a person who already died once anyway, so there was nothing to lose. He only knew that Yi Shiwen was very powerful. A Sage Realm Master was teased like bugs in Yi Zaiwen's hands, but he did not expect Yi Shiwen to be so powerful to this extent. He could fight against Gongyang Yongfeng, who was a long-known master among the great sages, without being in an inferior position. In fact, Yi Shiwen even prevailed. At least this meant that he didn't have to die. Even if Gongyang Yongfeng burst into rage, he could protect himself. Not only he didn't have to die, but it seemed that he even followed a super mighty person. This was simply an unexpected joy. It was an opportunity. Indeed, this was the opportunity that everyone talked about. Opportunity was the most important thing for a warrior. He didn't expect that his impulsive decision could actually give him such a great opportunity. Yi Shiwen didn't know that the people outside the battlefield were discussing incessantly. At this time, he was completely immersed in battle. The Guanren Sutra in his body was spinning speedily and streams of powerful qi gushed to all his limbs, making him as strong as an ox. He was just like a Greek god who fully unleashed all his strength. He actually looked more skilled the more he battled. Chapter 678, That Monster. Chapter 678. That monster-like person was injured. Yi Shiwen hadn't had such a hearty battle for a long time. Over this period of time, he had encountered opponents who were either too difficult to beat like the Soul Destruction Temple Master, or some extremely weak and flimsy people. There was no evenly matched opponent at all. Those people who were his peers at that time, and those masters who could have battled with him fell behind him gradually over time. His peers had become unable to withstand a battle. Therefore, it was not easy for him to find an opponent who let him battle to his heart's content, but he had found such a hearty feeling in Gongyang Yongfeng now. The feeling of being evenly matched where Yi Shiwen was neither too weak nor too strong. He could give his all into the battle. The long sword in his hand drew glimpses of sword light like it was tearing the sky and cutting it horizontally across. Suddenly, the sword and the spear were fighting together. Golden lights crept all over Yi Zaiwen's whole body gradually. This meant that in his heart, Gongyang Yongfeng was a worthy opponent and Yi Shiwen needed to do his utmost. After all, his realm was too low relatively speaking because he was just a half-step great sage intermediate. He was not even a great sage. Otherwise, he didn't need to battle so hard at all, and could defeat Gongyang Yongfeng easily. On the other side, Gongyang Yongfeng was more panicked as they battled on. Yi Shiwen was more powerful after each battle because Yi Shiwen had Phoenix regeneration technique, which enabled his vital energy and blood seemed to be endless. Yi Shiwen was always at his peak condition wherever he was. In contrast, Gongyang Yongfeng's vital energy and blood was not endless. The more Gongyang Yongfeng used it, the less was remaining. His original plan was to burst out a powerful combat power and restore to peak instantly, so that he could kill Yi Shiwen. In that case, even if it would consume some of his little remaining vital energy and blood, it was still within his acceptable range. But this battle was beyond his expectation. From the original plan of quick battle to a prolonged battle, his old age and decaying body became a fatal weakness at this time. It was not until now that he really felt old for the first time. He didn't even have such a strong feeling during angel decay previously. After all, it was his destiny, and he couldn't resist it. He really felt his aging evidently. But because of this matter, his gaze towards Yi Shiwen was even more like a beast that was about to devour people. Yi Shiwen ruined Gongyang Yongfeng's last hope. The dancing spear in Gongyang Yongfeng's hand was more terrifying, but he also felt Yi Zaiwen's more and more frenzied strength. Each slashing of Yi Zaiwen's sword was like Mount Tai, one crushing down. When the long sword was in Yi Zaiwen's hands, he could crush his opponent directly without any swordsmanship. It was like a strong unskilled man who could defeat 10 skilled men. No matter what magnificent spear skills you had, how strange the angle was and how tricky it was, it didn't matter to him. He confronted it directly. He charged towards you and tore you into shreds directly. In this case, Gongyang Yongfeng could hardly attack. Yi Shiwen could take on Gongyang Yongfeng's spear with his bare hands without changing his expression. But Gongyang Yongfeng couldn't do such a horrible thing. If he was cut by the sword, he would probably pass away while sitting cross-legged without having to wait for angel decay. Gongyang Yongfeng felt that his arm was almost numb every time they collided. It was just like the moment of being electrocuted, or a high voltage of hundreds of thousands of volts which instantly paralyzed his arm. If it wasn't because of the wood martial technique he cultivated which had a special effect in repairing things in the body, his arm would have been shattered by Yi Shiwen by now. This was the first time he felt that a human body could actually be so powerful to such a horrifying extent. Yi Shiwen was actually able to challenge across power realms. Gongyang Yongfeng was a great sage himself, so he knew that the gap between great sage and sage realm was basically a world's difference. He had never encountered a person who could challenge across power realms. Not to mention it was against an experienced great sage like him. Such a person was worthy of being the world's utmost pride. So let me die. There was a trace of madness in Gongyang Yongfeng's eyes. He could feel that if he continued to fight like this, Yi Shiwen might exhaust him to death. He could feel that as the battle became more intense, Yi Shiwen was somehow acting by instinct. Yi Zaiwen's eyes were a little misty. He was in sudden enlightenment. Suddenly, it was difficult to suppress the burning anger in Gongyang Yongfeng's heart as it soared all over his body. He wanted to seek revenge for his beloved disciple and kill this guy who dared to abolish his disciple's martial arts. But Gongyang Yongfeng did not expect to be treated as a stepping stone for this person to advance. The person in front of Gongyang Yongfeng obviously battled with Gongyang Yongfeng in order to break through the current state in one shot. Compared to the anger of being used as a stepping stone, the fear of Yi Zaiwen's breakthrough made Gongyang Yongfeng tremble uncontrollably. Yi Shiwen, who was only a half-step Great Sage Intermediate, was already so scary now. If Yi Shiwen broke into half-step Great Sage late, there would surely be an increase in combat power regardless whether the combat power would push him into the Great Sage late level. At that time, it would not be a prolonged battle that was evenly matched, but a one-sided massacre. Thinking of this, there was a trace of madness in Gongyang Yongfeng's eyes. When he had already reached this point of entering angel decay, he no longer had any scruples. Good techniques. Such a person is unprecedented and earth-shattering. I have never seen a genius person like you, but such a person will fall into my hands today. Ha ha ha. It will make this life worthwhile. Gongyang Yongfeng laughed loudly, and his expression seemed a little fanatical. The gourd behind him boiled suddenly, getting bigger and bigger, and it soon became the size of a hill. The gourd opening burst open in an instant, and then endless of wood qi gushed out of it uncontrollably, forming a huge wood qi river which infused into Gongyang Yongfeng's body. In Yi Zaiwen's eyes, Gongyang Yongfeng's body was enriched gradually at a speed visible to the naked eye. The old spots on Gongyang Yongfeng's face soon disappeared, and the white hair turned to fine black hair. His originally crooked and thin body figure became taller and stronger in the blink of an eye. He actually returned to the most vigorous period of his adult life. Gongyang Yongfeng was no longer old and tattered, but filled with unimaginable surging vitality. With his sharp vision, he stared coldly at Yi Shiwen while licking his lips. His face was filled with cruel gazes. He almost could see Yi Zaiwen's looks, the great genius in his eyes, when Yi Shiwen fell in his hands. His Bodhis aura was also rising gradually before he suddenly broke through Great Sage Intermediate and returned to Great Sage Late. The familiar power surged all over his body. Finally, he returned to the Great Sage Late. He yearned this level of strength. Yi Shiwen, be careful. This old man actually forced all vital energy and blood in his body to recover to the highest peak with the endless wood qi. He wanted to perish with you. After this battle, he definitely will die no matter whether he won or lost. Yi Mo shouted in shock. He was an old antique that had lived for countless years. An old monster who saw all kinds of tricks. At the moment when Gongyang Yongfeng began to transform, he already realized what Gongyang Yongfeng was up to. Yi Zaiwen's gaze became dignified immediately. He actually reverted to the Great Sage Late. Although he knew that Gongyang Yongfeng used to be a Great Sage Late, he did not expect that Gongyang Yongfeng would dare to make such a big decision. Gongyang Yongfeng would definitely die after this battle no matter if it was a victory or loss. Yi Mo was right in saying that Gongyang Yongfeng was planning to drag Yi Shiwen to perish together. Probably because Gongyang Yongfeng's last disciple was dead, and he was also close to his ultimate limit, so he was also like a desperate person who finally became crazy. However, Yi Shiwen did not give in at all. On the contrary, between his eyes as deep as the stars, it became scorching, as if two huge suns appeared in it. Yi Zaiwen's fighting spirit became higher. He already had the idea of using Gongyang Yongfeng as a stepping stone to make him break through. Now that Gongyang Yongfeng breaks through, he did not have any tension and fear. On the contrary, he was even more excited. In order to advance more, it was definitely better to have a higher stepping stone. At this time, someone finally noticed that Yi Shiwen was actually using Gongyang Yongfeng to brush up himself. When they noticed this, everyone was like crazy. It was already surpassing their imagination to fight Gongyang Yongfeng without being in an inferior position, but regarding Gongyang Yongfeng as a stepping stone was simply unimaginable for them. A Thousand Plants sect disciple even said mockingly, "He is overconfident. He actually dares to use a great sage as a stepping stone. He's really courting death." Now that elderly predecessor has returned to the peak, it will be a piece of cake to kill him. Obviously, they didn't notice that Gongyang Yongfeng was overdrawing his final vital energy and blood for the final battle. He wanted this battle to be his ending battle. Today is your doomsday. Gongyang Yongfeng's gaze was as sharp as a knife. His tall and sturdy body rushed to Yi Shiwen in an instant like a fierce beast. A wooden spear came out of his palm and fell in a flash with crashing sounds that were like the sound of a thunderstorm. The spear broke through the sound barrier in an attempt to stab Yi Shiwen into half. Yi Shiwen could almost feel that the terrifying strength of the spear was close to him. It was like a green lightning that had come straight to the front door in a split second. It was really scary. It was twice as fast as before. It was just completely different now. Dang. There was a sound of metals clashing. Yi Shiwen raised his hand, which transformed into a huge mountain before pressing it down. Kaboom! There was a huge explosion sound. The whole mountain was pierced through by the spear. The sharp spear tip pierced directly into Yi Ziwen's palm, and blood dripped profusely from Yi Ziwen's hand. Everyone was silent, a deadly silence. Everyone kept quiet. This was the first time Yi Shiwen was injured in this battle. 1. A Chinese popular saying as a metaphor to depict something really heavy or great in magnitude. Chapter 679. All previous efforts were wasted. That monstrous person was injured. Everyone gasped after seeing the scene in front of them. In their hearts, Yi Shiwen, who fought against a great sage as a half-step great sage, was almost like a demon god. He was really a monster. But now this monster was injured. He was injured indeed. In their perspective, if this was not a myth, then what else? Previously, the prediction of victory in their hearts had unconsciously weighted towards Yi Shiwen instead of Gongyang Yongfeng. Yi Shiwen was not a great sage, but did it matter? Who had ever seen a half-step great sage suppressing and beating a great sage? Yet Yi Shiwen did it. So they couldn't help but to think highly of Yi Shiwen indistinctly. Furthermore, the most important thing was that everyone could see Yi Ziwen's vital energy and blood was vigorous, and was in his peak state. Meanwhile, Gongyang Yongfeng's vital energy and blood was depleting as he used it. Sooner or later, Gongyang Yongfeng would die of vital energy and blood deficiency. But now Yi Shiwen was actually injured, and there seemed to be a complete turn of events. Initially, it was difficult for Gongyang Yongfeng to hurt Yi Shiwen no matter how he attacked Yi Shiwen. Now Gongyang Yongfeng pierced into Shi Ziwen's palm with just a move. Their moods were like taking a roller coaster ride. One moment they were in heaven and the next moment they were in hell. I must break your bones today and let you die with a tragic end. I'll grind your bone and scatter the bone powder. Gongyang Yongfeng's voice was like from hell, cold, merciless, and cruel. This was his last battle. He would die regardless of victory or defeat, so he did not have any emotions. His mental fortitude upgraded in an instant. He was giving his everything in the impasse. This was a sign of breakthrough to the peak of the great sage. But at this time, Gongyang Yongfeng could only smile bitterly. Why didn't it come earlier? What is the use of this feeling now? He would definitely die after this battle, but then this feeling disappeared again. There was only a state of no sadness and no joy. The spear moved with achiang sound, and there was a faint sound like a dragon whistling. Azure green brilliant rays glowed faintly on the wooden spear. It was unbelievably harder than golden iron after being tempered for numerous times. There was no more vitality in the wood now, only vicious killing intentions. Shwa! The spear shook away its previous image, and was approaching Yi Ziwen's face again the next second. The speed was simply unimaginable. It was like a long dragon with its mouth wide open, longing for a bite. In between Yi Ziwen's eyes, it seemed that cosmic stars were being destroyed and reborn. He had also entered the state of enlightenment. He had never changed his mind about using Gongyang Yongfeng to brush up himself. Boom! The spear penetrated into Yi Ziwen's body, and at that moment, it turned into a cluster of golden light. The spear passed through the golden light and penetrated into the space fiercely. Chaos seeped through the broken space, which shattered the nearby meteorites. Although it was only a small cluster, it was as heavy as Mount Tai. The cluster of golden light did not disappear. Instead, it soared all the way along with the spear and went straight to Gongyang Yongfeng. Then it transformed into a human figure like a celestial deity. Yi Ziwen's whole body was golden as if it was forged by gold. He had ice-cold expressions. Behind him was a pair of huge wings which were approximately 30 feet long when fully expanded. They flapped suddenly, turning into an endless storm power in an instant. It was like one after another storm blades charged towards Gongyang Yongfeng. Every storm blade was a few inches long. Although it was not big, it could cut off anything. With the support of the infinite storm power, the speed was abnormally fast. The blades reached less than 3 inches in front of Gongyang Yongfeng in an instant. In between Gongyang Yongfeng's eyes, a fine light flickered past. With a sneer, the wood energy all over his body spewed out, and trees actually grew wildly on his body. They formed a body armor which covered him in it completely. The storm blades severely chopped the trees, but the armor could not be penetrated. So the endless storm power dissipated in the air. Yi Shiwen roared fiercely. It was just a prelude just now. He charged forward with his left hand squeezed into a fist, and suddenly punched down. It turned into a gigantic star which stamped on the wooden armor. Swoosh! Kaboom! Bang! All kinds of noise popped up in an instant. Yi Zaiwen's fist pressure thrusted on the wooden armor fiercely, and a part of the wooden armor cracked at the moment of contact, but the wood energy seemed to be endless. The cracks were repaired immediately after they were shattered. It was constantly broken and repaired continuously. Even with Yi Zaiwen's infinite strength, he couldn't penetrate it in a short time. It was almost time. Shortly, Yi Shiwen finally cracked most of the wooden armor, and saw Gongyang Yongfeng under the wooden armor. But Gongyang Yongfeng was slightly sneering under the broken armor. Yi Shiwen sensed something amiss suddenly. An unpleasant feeling hit his heart suddenly, and he stepped out of the golden light quickly while his body shifted out hundreds of feet instantly. At the same time, a long spear grew out of the wooden armor with an unimaginable speed, and chased Yi Shiwen directly. The spear's speed was actually not slower than Yi Shiwen. Poof! The long spear pierced its first cluster of golden light, and Yi Shiwen disappeared without a trace, but a spray of blood was spewed out. Thousands of feet away, Yi Zaiwen's figure appeared suddenly. He was panting, and his arm was bleeding profusely. A huge wound was torn on his arm, but his gaze was cold, and he didn't seem to care about the injury at all. During this confrontation, he suffered some losses. He used the Phoenix regeneration technique, and the wounds on his body were recovering at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. He knew very well that the Gongyang Yongfeng in front of him would probably be dead soon. The stronger Gongyang Yongfeng was, the faster he would decay. Yi Shiwen didn't even have to fight. He only had to hang on, and it would exhaust Gongyang Yongfeng to death. He was old and his time had ended. Yi Zaiwen's speed was so rapid that even the Soul Destruction Temple's temple master couldn't catch up with his speed, and let him flee eventually. But Yi Shiwen didn't want this battle to be like that. He wanted an upright battle. Not only was it a respect for his dying opponent, it was also to brush up himself at the same time. If his opponent was not strong enough, how could he have sufficient pressure to grow? Come on, let me send you off your last journey. Yi Zaiwen's mouth flashed a smile, and charged upwards. It was another glimpse of golden light flashing which set off boundless golden waves. Everyone was dumbfounded. In their view, the two were fighting too fast. What they saw was simply pieces of afterimages, and it was difficult to really see the two fighting clearly, especially when they saw that Yi Shiwen was in an inferior position. Originally, Yi Shiwen was like wearing armor, and Gongyang Yongfeng couldn't seem to hurt Yi Shiwen at all no matter how hard Gongyang Yongfeng attacked. Yet the situation was reversed now. Gongyang Yongfeng could injure Yi Shiwen now. Although Yi Shiwen could injure Gongyang Yongfeng as well, Yi Shiwen was at disadvantage. What was more unbelievable for countless people was Yi Zaiwen's swift recovery ability. The injuries on his body were recovering at the speed that they could see with their naked eyes. It was really incredible. Everyone was very puzzled. Even fools could see that Gongyang Yongfeng was overdrawing his vitality, so that he could become unprecedentedly powerful in his last battle now. Yi Shiwen didn't even need to attack. Even dragging the battle would kill Gongyang Yongfeng. Why must Yi Shiwen fight against him fearlessly? In their hearts, this was not scientific at all. Senior Long is brushing up himself. Only Yongtingyu said excitedly. He wants to brush up himself with the most powerful state of Gongyang Yongfeng in order to facilitate his breakthrough. Everyone couldn't help but to gasp after listening to him. Yi Shiwen was brushing up himself previously, and many people failed to notice this. But at that time, The battle between Yi Shiwen and Gongyang Yongfeng was considered evenly matched. In fact, Yi Shiwen had the upper hand, but it was different now. In the face of Gongyang Yongfeng, who was in Great Sage late, Yi Shiwen completely fell into the inferior position, and might even be stabbed to death in a move. How would Yi Shiwen dare to brush up himself using Gongyang Yongfeng at this time? This is why you can never compare with Senior Long. You will only challenge the opponents within your ability. There will never really be a major breakthrough. Yang Tingyu thought proudly while he looked disdainfully at the crowd who were in disbelief. It was as though he was the one fighting the grand battle at this time, rather than Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was injured from time to time, and the severe pain made him feel like gasping, but he was getting more excited as he battled. All of his martial techniques were running, especially Guanren Sutra and Phoenix Regeneration Technique. It was running almost all the time. He could already feel that the realm barrier was almost in front of him, and he could nearly break through it. It was just like separated by a layer of gauze, and he might break through at any time. The more he could feel the other realm, the more excited Yi Shiwen was in his heart. He was giving in his best in battling and didn't bother about his Bodis injuries. If it was any ordinary person, he would have been killed long ago. However, with the Phoenix Regeneration Technique, Yi Shiwen could return to the optimal condition within an extreme time. Therefore, he was not afraid of fatal damage at all, so he was more courageous as he battled. On the other hand, Gongyang Yongfeng had endless wood energy to restore his vitality. He was like a fighting machine that never wore out. The two fought all the way to the depths of the stars, and there were meteorites in space shattered around them everywhere. Both of their aura had escalated to the strongest point. They were already at the threshold of breakthrough. It seemed that the victory and defeat of the two sides were about to be revealed. Whoever broke through first would have an overwhelming advantage. Two of you, please stop. A resonant voice was heard from a distance. The sound came from afar. By this time, the two had battled to the point of sparks flying off in all directions, and both were fully immersed in it. How could they stop? This is a critical juncture. I need only one final push. Yi Shiwen shouted in his heart and shot a punch. The terrifying power of the punch struck Gongyang Yongfeng's body. Bang! Gongyang Yongfeng was directly blasted out. Gongyang Yongfeng's originally tall and straight figure shrank suddenly, and it became crooked again. His vitality was cut off immediately. Yi Shiwen was also about to take the breakthrough step, but he got stuck and failed to step out. All his previous efforts were wasted. Chapter 680. Darn, who said he is a semi-sage? All previous efforts were wasted. Yi Shiwen was only a step away from his goal. If only he had fought for a while more, he would be able to step into half-step Great Sage late. By that time, he would really be just half-step away from Great Sage. Then, he could really start to prepare for the breakthrough of Great Sage. Initially, he was planning to think about the breakthrough after returning from Medicine King Valley, but now he had the opportunity to break through in advance, so he certainly would not give up. After all, it would be better if he could break through as soon as possible since a chaotic world was approaching. But Yi Shiwen didn't expect that after a bloody battle, Gongyang Yongfeng died of vital energy deficiency and blood deficiency, when Yi Shiwen was just one step away from breaking through. In the end, Gongyang Yongfeng still didn't manage to kill Yi Shiwen before dying. Instead, he just died while sitting cross-legged directly. This feeling of being at the edge of breakthrough, and yet not breaking through, made Yi Shiwen so depressed that he could vomit blood. Elderly predecessor. Master. Grandmaster. After the crowd was quiet for a while, the people of Thousand Plants sect reacted immediately, and flew to Gongyang Yongfeng. They saw Gongyang Yongfeng was already as thin as a lath to the point of mere skeletons. The battle just now had consumed his last vital energy and blood. Therefore, when Gongyang Yongfeng died now, he was like a skull covered with human skin, which looked really creepy. The Thousand Plants sect disciples' glare at Yi Shiwen was unusually vicious. They originally came to participate in the Truth Discussion Conference organized by several alchemy masters. Not only those individual cultivators felt the opportunity was rare, the Thousand Plants sect disciples shared the same sentiment too. For them, it was an utmost honor to meet the alchemy masters, who were not seen normally, and get some pointers from these masters. But the disciples didn't expect they would actually witness such a horrible scene upon coming here. The elderly predecessor who they respected like God in their hearts was actually killed by a punch. This was a miraculous phenomenon. Even though Gongyang Yongfeng's rapid decay of vital energy and blood made him far worse than he was at the beginning, he still had an invincible presence in his disciples' hearts, and his prestigious reputation was deeply rooted in their hearts. Before they entered the Thousand Plants sect, Gongyang Yongfeng was already a great sage who was well known in the area. They knew that Gongyang Yongfeng was not really killed by Yi Shiwen. Gongyang Yongfeng basically exhausted himself to death. He overdrawn all his physical strength, but he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen within a short period of time, and it developed to this ending eventually. Yi Shiwen was fine, but Gongyang Yongfeng was exhausted to death. But if it wasn't for Yi Shiwen, how would it develop into such a situation in the end? Their famous elderly predecessor actually died on the spot. It definitely never crossed their mind that if it weren't for their teasing or attempt to kill these individual cultivators previously, the latter series of events would not happen. That was the ultimate cause of everything, but they certainly would not admit it. They would only direct all their resentment to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't care about their vicious gaze. In his eyes, these people were all washed up. Yi Shiwen was still depressed that he was just one step away, but all his efforts were wasted. He was still figuring out what he just learned during the battle. Wherever Yi Shiwen looked, those people lowered their heads and did not dare to look directly at Yi Ziwen's gaze, which seemed very serious. A moment later, glimpses of lights came across the universe, headed by a white-haired old man with a youthful look. Beside him was Tian Butong, the leader of Feihong Mansion previously. "Hey, I didn't expect that we are one step too late," the white-haired old man with a youthful look said while sighing. "Brother Gongyang." Seeing these people coming, Yi Shiwen was vigilant immediately because the people who came were extraordinary. Tian Butong's strength alone was greater than the current Yi Shiwen. And this white-haired old man with a youthful look was actually not inferior to Gongyang Yongfeng, who unleashed all his power completely just now. This old man was a master and great sage late, so Yi Shiwen had to be careful. If they launched an attack, then he might have to leave on the spot. But the white-haired old man with a youthful look was just lamenting before approaching Yi Shiwen and said, "May I know your name, brother?" Seeing this old man, many surrounding people recognized him. It turned out to be the Valley Lord of Medicine King Valley, Yao Buping. Seeing that Yao Buping did not seem hostile, Yi Shiwen was slightly relaxed. But come to think of it, it made sense too. After all, it was the elder of Thousand Plants sect who died, and not the people of Medicine King Valley. Yao Buping definitely didn't have to avenge for Gongyang Yongfeng. Furthermore, Yi Shiwen was not an average sage realm master. He was an elite master who exhausted even Gongyang Yongfeng to death. Although Yi Shiwen was not a great sage, his combat power was also comparable to a great sage. It was not worthwhile at all to offend a great sage for an elder of Thousand Plants sect. If a great sage was determined to fight against you, he would slaughter all your disciples, which would be a serious harm to the sect unless your mountain door was closed tightly. They were not so stupid to offend a mighty disciple for Thousand Plants sect. "My surname is Long," said Yi Shiwen. It turned out to be a brother Long. Yao Buping seemed to recall all of a sudden that there was indeed such a powerful person in the invitations he sent out. Although they were from individual cultivation sects, those who were capable of refining standard grade pellets were only a few, let alone a semi-sage. In the past, Yao Buping heard that this man was a semi-sage alchemy master who was able to refine standard grade pellets, so he invited Yi Shiwen to come. He even signed the invitation letter personally, so he had an impression of it. However, Yao Buping couldn't help but to smile bitterly at this time. What news is this claiming Brother Long is in semi-sage? Does he look like he's in semi-sage? Have you ever seen a semi-sage exhaust a great sage to death? He really wanted to strangle the person who gave him this news at that time. Yi Shiwen was clearly a half-step great sage. In fact, he was also a half-step great sage that could compete with a great sage. But it was alright. Previously, Yao Buping was still skeptical about Yi Ziwen's ability to refine standard grade pellets since he was only a semi-sage. Now, Yao Buping had completely believed it. It was more normal that a half-step great sage produced standard-grade pellets. What an honor to have Brother Longs here. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you, Yao Buping said while arching his hand repeatedly. Although he was much older than Yi Shiwen, he didn't feel it was inappropriate. Let me introduce to you. This is Brother Tian Butong from Feihong Mansion, said Yao Buping. Yi Shiwen arched his hands politely. Yi Shiwen was not a person who didn't understand politeness at all. Since the two men were not malicious to him, he was able to tell the good from the bad naturally. The three of them landed on the light while talking and laughing into Medicine King Valley. Everyone was a little dumbfounded. Yao Buping reacted like nothing happened. He didn't even burst into fury and wanted to kill Yi Shiwen as everyone imagined. Suddenly they were astounded, particularly those Thousand Plants sect disciples who never expected that Yao Buping would have no intention to stand up for them. They couldn't help but to look at Yao Buping with resentment. They originally gazed at Yao Buping with joy to uphold the justice, and to kill Yi Shiwen in order to avenge for Gongyang Yongfeng. But the result was Yi Shiwen was regarded as a brother. Yao Buping had no intention of standing up for elderly predecessor at all. Seeing the three people disappeared from their eyes, the Thousand Plants sect disciples were taken aback with shock. They all cursed and yelled suddenly, as if they wanted to vent all the anger that had not been vented just now because they didn't dare to. Only the Medicine King Valley disciples sneered and looked at the Thousand Plants sect disciples who were cursing. The underlying reason for this matter was soon spread out. Everyone knew that this issue was caused by Thousand Plants sect originally. Did they still expect the Medicine King Valley to offend this great character for Thousand Plants sect? A half-step great sage who could exhaust a great sage to death could definitely turn the Medicine King Valley into a complete chaos. After all, they were not powerful people like those from true martial school, who could ignore the threats of great sages or even transcendent masters. If the Thousand Plants sect disciples had the ability, they would fight to death with Yi Shiwen and the others. It was simply impossible to expect Medicine King Valley to be their cat's paw one. The attitude towards a person changed with one's social position. There were still some great sages presiding over Thousand Plants sect, so the sect was not completely overlooked yet. But as the most mighty Gongyang Yongfeng who was exhausted to death, the deterrent of the sect was also not as powerful as before. The world was cruel indeed. Many individual cultivators saw this scene, and they couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. These major sects were nothing more than that. Yi Shiwen and the other two landed on the light, and went directly into the depths of Medicine King Valley. They no longer stayed at the plaza, which was basically the place for some individual cultivators. After the battle just now, Yi Shiwen was listed as a VIP by the Medicine King Valley. Naturally, there was another place to serve them. Yi Shiwen followed Yao Buping and Tian Butong into a palace. There were hundreds of people in the palace's main hall. They were all the top elites in Sage Realm who had extraordinary aura. The lowest was in Sage Realm Great Mastery, and several of them were in half-step Great Sage. A Great Sage was even sitting on a throne at the other end of the main hall. These people shared a typical characteristic, which was the strong smell of pellets in their body. They were almost like human medicine. Every drop of blood in their body was a supreme treasure. Ordinary people could break into a master of the true way directly by just consuming a drop of their blood. All of them were alchemy teachers. Most of their time was spent in alchemy. Although they had unique alchemy cultivation techniques, they couldn't be compared with other martial artists who had been practicing all year round. So they basically consumed the pellets to push themselves all the way up. Therefore, these people had accumulated the power of countless medicinal materials, and their refining process was far less efficient than Yi Shiwen, which resulted in a large amount of medicinal materials to accumulate in the body. They were basically human medicine. In fact, putting them into an alchemy furnace would produce an almighty pellet. A person who is used by another to carry out an unpleasant or dangerous task. Chapter 681. About to start. Every drop of blood in their entire body was extremely valuable. Yi Shiwen heard from Yao Buping that these were all alchemy masters who could refine standard-grade pellets. Their cultivation might not seem remarkable, but they were all in Sage Realm. Although they seemed ordinary, Their positions in the outside world were not very different from great sage. It was almost equivalent to the magnitude of more than 100 great sages gathering together. When thinking of this, Yi Shiwen could not help but to gasp. Although he expected that this conference might attract many masters who had succeeded in alchemy, he did not expect that it would attract so many great alchemy masters. Although their cultivations were not comparable to Yi Shiwen, the huge force behind them caused Yi Shiwen to be cautious. When these people refined pellets on typical days, many warriors must have benefited from them. They could simply roar, and it would probably summon many help from these expert warriors. It would be most troublesome to provoke these people, and no one would want to provoke them. These hundreds of people were not a lot, but their deeply rooted and intertwined relationship was like old trees' entangled roots. It was enough for any force in the universe to be fearful of them. These people were not lower than the great sage status in the outside world on normal days, so there were very few things that could attract them. It was only a pellet that could break through the great sage could bring them together. Such a pellet and pellet recipe was very rare and important for a force, but it was the same for them individually. Many of them were sage realm great perfection, and even half-step great sage. It was also a matter of breaking into the great sage for them. Being able to break into the great sage with one's own strength was a rare thing itself, not to mention that they spend most of their time on alchemy, so it was even more difficult for them compared to ordinary warriors. It was impossible to enter into the great sage unless they were top geniuses. However, the situation would be completely different with the help of such a pellet. Since their social positions were very high, they gained access to a lot of resources. If they could produce this pellet, then breaking into great sage would just be around the corner. Although they enjoyed the status and treatment no less than that of the great sage, they were not great sage after all. Aside from the fact that their lifespans were half of a great sage, their strength was also a far cry from a great sage. Generally speaking, great sages were not willing to provoke them, but a great sage could kill them easily if they were forced to. While they were enjoying the pride and treatment, such a sense of crisis made them want to break into great sage all the time. However, their cultivation, which was driven by pellets, could not process and absorb the pellets completely like Yi Shiwen, so it was more difficult for them to break through. In other words, it was impossible to go further if there was no miraculous encounter. They could only rely on pellets. So after hearing about this conference, they immediately rushed here from every part of the universe. Moreover, just some idle and individual alchemy masters in the nearby star region already amounted to hundreds of people. If all the alchemy masters came, the number would be much more than this. Semi-sage or legend individual cultivators would regard these people as great masters. Getting a few pointers from them would be enough for the individual cultivators to use for life. After the three of them entered the main hall, everyone looked at Yi Shiwen in unison. They were anticipating the identity of the next alchemy master, but looking at Yi Ziwen's unbelievably young appearance, they were unfamiliar and didn't know the origin of this man. "Brother Long, please take a seat," Yao Buping said to Yi Shiwen, pointing to one of the 4 thrones in the main hall. Those who could sit there were all great sages, while other sage realms or half-step great sages could only sit in other rows of seats. Obviously, this should have been Gongyang Yongfeng's seat, but since Yi Shiwen had killed Gongyang Yongfeng now, this became Yi Ziwen's seat logically. Yi Shiwen did not shy away, and he sat on that throne directly. Next to him was a great sage who was not from a sect, but an elderly predecessor in individual cultivation, Qing Xuanzi. His cultivation was very strong, which was not inferior to Tian Butong. An individual cultivator who could cultivate to such a level must have considerably remarkable talent and miraculous encounters. He must have a very distinguished reputation among the individual cultivators in this star region. Everyone wondered why Yi Shiwen was invited to sit on this throne. After all, this was a place that only great sages could touch. Most importantly, this was originally Gongyang Yongfeng's seat. Why was it actually given to Yi Shiwen now? What was happening? Some quick-witted people had already figured out that perhaps something happened to Gongyang Yongfeng. Gongyang Yongfeng rushed out furiously just now, but he did not come back. Meanwhile, Tian Butong and Yao Buping, who went out to look for Gongyang Yongfeng, brought another person back instead. This was quite obvious. If something didn't happen to Gongyang Yongfeng, Yao Buping would never give Gongyang Yongfeng's seat to the young man in front of them. Adding another throne was not a difficult thing. Yi Shiwen glanced at the alchemy masters present, and actually spotted Jiang Zhouqing, the president of the Alchemist Association of the Great Wei Empire. Yi Shiwen had not seen him for more than 20 years, but he was quite the same from 20 years ago. There was no big difference, and the most important thing was that he could stand here, which meant that he had advanced to be an alchemy master and could refine standard grade pellets. This made Yi Shiwen slightly surprised. After everyone was seated, Yao Buping said, "Dear brothers, I am very happy that everyone can come to participate in this discussion this time held by us at Medicine King Valley. This time, we will start to refine Violet Limitless Chi Pellet tomorrow onwards. I hope everyone will lend a hand by then." Hearing Yao Buping mentioning the pellet that would be refined this time, everyone's mind was extremely focused suddenly. What happened to Gongyang Yongfeng was no longer within their consideration. It had nothing to do with them anyway. They were just curious. On the other hand, this Violet Limitless Chi pellet had an extremely close relationship with them. This was the name of the pellet that could help them break into the Great Sage realm. It was said to be an ancient pellet recipe which was obtained by Medicine King Valley. Of course, these origins were irrelevant to them, but the main point was that Medicine King Valley promised to distribute a pellet recipe to each of them once they succeeded. This was the reason why so many alchemy masters would be attracted in such a short period of time. Otherwise, why would they come to help in Medicine King Valley's matter? They only came because of this promise. Although having the pellet recipe would not mean they could definitely refine such pellets, it was much better than having no idea at all. Yi Shiwen was not really excited upon hearing this. He had no interest in the so-called pellet recipe originally. If he wanted a pellet recipe, he also had one in possession, but what he wanted was a pellet that allowed him to break through Great Sage. That was the top priority amongst others. But in this case, he could only act according to the situation. After refining the pellets, we at Medicine King Valley will also hold a truth discussion conference, and the alchemy cultivators nearby will also come. I hope that everyone can participate at that time," Yao Buping said while looking at the crowd. Sure enough, the interest on everyone's face was significantly less than the Violet Limitless Chi pellet just now, but they were still quite intrigued. After all, it was Violet Limitless Chi pellet that could help them break into the Great Sage realm. But they were still interested in this truth discussion conference. Normally, they all cultivated separately and rarely had the opportunity to gather together and discuss the truth. These people were considered the great masters in alchemy. Being together was not only beneficial for those individual cultivators, it was also an exceptional opportunity for the great masters to confirm their truth and absorb others' strengths too. As Yi Shiwen listened, this gathering mainly had two purposes. One was for Violet Limitless Chi pellet, and the other was the Truth Discussion Conference, which was also the most anticipated event of many individual cultivators. They understood that Violet Limitless Chi pellet had nothing much to do with them. Even if they get it, they would not be able to keep it. Even forces like Medicine King Valley must disperse the pellet recipe using this way. And the reason was to distribute the pressure. If only they had the pellet recipe, then the pressure they face would be unprecedentedly large that even Meteor Sect might attack them. However, if these pellet recipes were distributed to every top alchemy cultivator, then no one would target Medicine King Valley again. Then the situation would be much better. Although the Alchemist Association was also a huge association, Medicine King Valley was only a sect force affiliated with the Alchemist Association. They were not the Alchemist Association itself. Furthermore, these individual cultivators naturally had self-knowledge, so they all put their attention on the Truth Discussion Conference after the pellets were refined. More than 100 alchemy masters discussing the truth was a grand occasion that had never happened for the individual cultivators. They could definitely benefit a lot from it. Perhaps they might even break through because of that. This was also true for these alchemy masters. So although it was not as exhilarating as Violet Limitless Chi pellet, they were looking forward to participating in the conference as well. Of course, we will definitely participate. We have few chances of gathering like this normally. All thanks to Medicine King Valley for giving us the opportunity this time. That's right, we will surely participate. Although it was apparent that Medicine King Valley also wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to expand its influence and improve its status, everyone still echoed and cheered. After all, they had received the benefits from Medicine King Valley. The value of the Violet Limitless Chi Pellet recipe was priceless. Equals 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 bear. With me on the long update here irrelevant to plot. Quick update on glossary. 1. Domineering body shall be referred as tyrant body from now on. 2. Real martial domain shall be referred as true martial domain from now on. I only realized it later on after I think about the relationship between true martial school and true martial domain. The very reason I chose the word true is because I have other glossary that goes with truth conference and true martial Dao. Chapter 682. Shocking 4 thrones. After everyone arrived, the alchemy conference began. There were dozens more people than they were at the beginning. They just arrived because they were situated too far away. They were all experienced and skilled cultivators who could refine pellets directly without resting. With Yi Shiwen and the other 3 men as the head, they reached a huge plaza directly. There were already many individual cultivators waiting around, but some were late. Nevertheless, the individual cultivators did not look upset. They think the latecomers were entitled to such treatment since they were all great masters. Yi Shiwen saw Yang Tingyu among the crowd not far away. Because of Yi Shiwen, he also received special treatment by the people of Medicine King Valley. He was sitting cross-legged in the first row. It could be said that he was the only individual cultivator sitting there. Yang Tingyu naturally knew the reason for such a treatment, so he was slightly excited while looking at Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen looked around. Within the entire plaza, there was a huge alchemy furnace which was approximately 100 feet long and 200 feet wide. It was gigantic like no other. The furnace walls were engraved with complex and profound arrays which exuded unspeakable majesty. It turned out to be a great sage device which was a magnificent one. Countless spiritual energy which was seething underneath turned into a series of alchemy flames, which was constantly burning. This should be the Medicine King Cauldron, which was Medicine King Valley's magnificent great sage device which established the sect. According to the legend, it was a great sage device that was built and refined by the Medicine King Valley's sect founding patriarch in the past. The cauldron had refined countless worlds' outstanding pellets, which established its reputation gradually. The Medicine King Cauldron would not be used under normal circumstances. Not only because it was not necessary, but also because the consumption was so tremendous that it would make one frown. Besides the founding patriarch, no one in Medicine King Valley could activate this Medicine King Cauldron alone. The past founding patriarch was an invincible master in the Great Sage Great Perfection realm, but there was no longer such a person in Medicine King Valley now. At most, it was Yao Buping who was in the Great Sage late. Several great sages had to join hands to use the Medicine King Cauldron every time, and each activation would even consume a whole spiritual vein. However, it could also be seen that Medicine King Valley was extremely determined this time. If the pellet was refined successfully, a great sage would emerge directly on the spot. It was still worthwhile despite the enormous cost. The Medicine King Cauldron constantly exuded white spiritual mist, which was mixed with medicinal fragrances assailing one's nostrils. There were probably many flavors of medicinal materials added. Everyone felt that inhaling this medicinal fragrance once would open up all their veins. It had endless benefits, especially for those individual cultivators. There were several legend individual cultivators who had a breakthrough into semi-sage on the spot. One could imagine the strength of this medicine effect. Layers of invisible arrays surrounded and protected this Medicine King Cauldron, because it was too important for Medicine King Valley. They were not afraid that someone would destroy the cauldron. With the mighty power of a magnificent great sage device, It was impossible to destroy the Medicine King Cauldron, even if all of these people attacked. Instead, they were concerned that some individual cultivators, or even some people with ill intentions in the Medicine King Valley would disrupt the pellet refining. Although alchemy cultivation was not the mainstream, there were definitely a lot of alchemy cultivators, and Medicine King Valley was just one of them. Someone would surely be dissatisfied with the fact that Medicine King Valley was about to refine Violet Limitless Chi pellet. These people might attack, so Medicine King Valley was also extremely well prepared. Brothers, we have been tempering this Violet Limitless Chi pellet for more than 10 years, and it is already a semi-finished product long ago. I hope that all brothers will work together in the next phase to make this pellet a finished product, said Yao Booping. The Medicine King Valley could be said to rack their brains and invested a considerably huge amount of resources in order to refine this Violet Limitless Chi pellet. They had been tempering it into semi-finished products since more than 10 years ago just to wait for it to be refined completely today. It was their first time refining Violet Limitless Chi pellet, so they naturally wanted to be well prepared. If they were to refine it in the future when they already had the experience, then everything would be simple. The huge consumption and preparation work could be reduced tremendously too. In other words, it was just a trial product now, and it would enter the streamlined production in the future. Of course, this level of pellet was already almost a level 6 man-grade pellet. Even if it entered the streamlined production, it could not be mass-produced. However, it would definitely be stronger than the present. The standard grade pellets were divided into 3 grades: Heaven, Earth, and Man. Each grade was divided into 9 levels. Among these 9 levels, level 1 to level 3 were inferior grades. Level 4 to level 5 were middle grades. Level 7 to level 9 were top grades. Level 6 was already the strongest pellet that Medicine King Valley could produce. As for the human grade top level pellets, it must be performed by those in Transcendent Realm to be successful. Of course, if a Transcendent Realm master refined this kind of pellet, it would be much simpler. It would even require less consumption with higher chance of success, but alchemy was not the mainstream. Moreover, alchemy cultivation was tough. It was not easy to cultivate to be a great sage, let alone Transcendent Realm. Currently, only the president of the Alchemist Association was regarded as an alchemy cultivator in the Transcendent Realm. However, with Medicine King Valley's strength, it was naturally hard to invite a distinguished character like the president of the Alchemist Association. Many great alchemy masters nodded one after another, and they looked solemn. At this moment, they were in the same mood as the people in Medicine King Valley, which was to hope that the pellet could be refined successfully. Although the pellet had nothing to do with them eventually, they could obtain the pellet recipe. If it was refined successfully, they would surely have more experience, which would eventually increase the chances of success. More than 100 alchemy masters led by Yi Shiwen and the other 3 men started to sit cross-legged at all sides. They all started refining, and various colors of alchemy flames flew out instantly, shining the entire space and gushing into the Medicine King Cauldron. Many individual cultivators were so fascinated by just watching the various alchemy flames that were rarely seen on usual days. If alchemy cultivators wanted to refine pellets, it was not possible to rely on ordinary flames only. Furthermore, most pellets would require various conditions, and one of the important points was the flame temperature. They all had cultivated their own alchemy flame, and every person's alchemy flame was different. These were all great alchemy masters, so the alchemy flame techniques alone would require the individual cultivators to learn for a long time. Particularly the 4 leading men sitting around Medicine King Cauldron, whose alchemy flames were stunning to see. Yao Booping and the 2 men's alchemy flames were close to blazing white color, and the temperature was very high. Only Yi Zaiwen's flame was different. It was actually a golden alchemy flame among the various alchemy flames. That golden alchemy flame was extremely dazzling and outstanding among all the alchemy flames. Although it seemed less than 1/10 of an average alchemy master, the light was shining brilliantly. It was as though his flame was about to suppress everyone's alchemy flames. The crowd's expression changed. Even Qing Xuanzi, Yao Booping and Tian Butong were startled after seeing it. One could see a person's mentorship through their alchemy flames. Generally, the deeper the background, the better the martial techniques of alchemy flame. The alchemy flames of the three of them were also the top among the crowd. It was not only because of their deep cultivation, but also because they had the best mentorship. But compared to Yi Zaiwen's alchemy flame, their flames paled in comparison. It was nothing significant. Yi Zaiwen's alchemy flame was very small. It was not even 1/10 of an average alchemy master, so the size was not comparable to them. However, the dazzling light almost suppressed all the lights of other alchemy flames. What is his alchemy flame? How could it be so bright? Everyone was wondering about Yi Zaiwen's alchemy flame. Although the size was small, the quality was surprisingly high. It was like a feeling that an emperor was born, and their alchemy flames were inferior and subject to this alchemy flame. Everyone stared fixedly at this alchemy flame, especially Yao Buping. He felt fortunate that he did not stir up a conflict with Yi Shiwen because of Gongyang Yangfeng's matter. Otherwise, who knew whose loss would it be? However, what they didn't know was that this alchemy flame was nothing but Yi Zaiwen's spontaneous breakthrough after a day's time. It was a type of alchemy flame cultivation method called Golden Sun Sacred Fire, which Yi Shiwen learned from Yi Mo. It was the emperor of the alchemy flame. According to Yi Mo, his master, the Supreme Demon King, led the Demon Domain army to conquer the world, and killed a super high-level alchemy cultivator in the past. The alchemy cultivator was said to be a domain lord too. His cultivation was very impressive, surpassing deities, saints and sages. This was the fated alchemy flame which he cultivated. After the alchemy cultivator's death, the alchemy flame cultivation method fell into the hands of the Demon King, and finally passed on to Yi Shiwen via Yi Mo. However, this kind of fated alchemy flame was extremely difficult to cultivate. If Yi Shiwen cultivated by himself, it was impossible to cultivate a trace of the Golden Sun Sacred Fire even after 100 years of cultivation. Fortunately, he had the help of the mysterious space where he could deduce the cultivation method. But even so, the cultivation method alone consumed a whopping 1 billion elixirs, while it took 2 billion elixirs to achieve this level of cultivation. In other words, while waiting for the arrival of other alchemy masters in this one-day period, he had consumed 3 billion elixirs, which was half of his net worth. The cost of this martial technique cultivation left Yi Shiwen flabbergasted. It was not inferior compared with Demon's Wings and Phoenix regeneration techniques, perhaps even more. However, although the technique had consumed a massive amount, the effect was obviously very remarkable. As soon as the Golden Sun Sacred Fire came out, the other alchemy flames pale in comparison. However, everyone was just surprised for a short moment, and soon dived into refining the pellet. Everyone present were alchemy experts. They naturally understood all the important conditions of alchemy, and all types of alchemy flames were put into the alchemy furnace in the same beat as well. They all received the pellet recipe just now, and naturally knew how to cultivate. Although it might not be entirely pure, it didn't matter because the Medicine King cauldron was very resilient. If it was another typical alchemy furnace, it would probably explode long ago. However, the Medicine King cauldron was very versatile. It was a very powerful device indeed. Time eventually passed while they were refining the pellet, and soon a month elapsed. Chapter 683. Mutations. Many alchemy masters did not move at all for a whole month during the alchemy process. Rather, they continued to invest in alchemy flame in accordance with specific techniques, refining the pellets. Undoubtedly, for many alchemists, refining the level 6 man-grade pellets had exceeded their capability. Sage Realm alchemists could only refine inferior pellets, such as level 1 to level 3 of man-grade pellets. If there were not 200 people collectively refining it in addition to having a great sage-level alchemy master, Yao Buping supervising it, they would never be able to refine Violet Limitless Chi pellet. Even for Yao Buping at great sage level, it was beyond his ability to refine Violet Limitless Chi pellet. If the patriarch from the past was still there, the situation would be very different. Despite it being nurtured for decades in addition to having hundreds of alchemy masters, making a collective effort to refine it at this moment, the whole refining process would still take a whole month. The difficulty in refining Violet Limitless Chi pellet was quite apparent. Not to mention it was beyond their ability to. But everyone was motionless as if they were just at the beginning stage. All of them were immersed in the pellet recipe. As the pellet recipe became more familiar, their movements began to be uniform, rhythmic, and regular. But the one having the biggest improvement was Yi Shiwen. Under the eyes of everyone, his progress was unimaginably fast. He had always been the center of attention since the beginning. The dazzling golden sun's sacred fire attracted everyone's attention, but soon everyone found out that his alchemy method was really crappy. Yi Shiwen was simply a novice who had not started alchemy for a long time, which made everyone inexplicable. He was like a person who owns a top sports car, but doesn't even know how to use the steering wheel. They didn't understand how this happened. Unbeknownst to them, Yi Shiwen was actually amateur compared to these alchemy masters. He could completely be regarded as a layman. He could only refine standard grade pellets due to his memorization. Just like a primary school student solving a university question. When someone else lists the solution, he only needs to memorize it, but it only pertains to a particular problem. If it becomes another question, the student will be dumbfounded. After all, that particular student has no foundation. Yi Shiwen was now in this situation. After all, he wasn't a cultivator centered on alchemy. It was impossible for him to devote most of his time and energy to alchemy, so his foundation was not greatly improved so far. It was not anyhow better than in the past. But soon they were shocked again. The speed of Yi Ziwen's progress made them stunned. In a short time, Yi Ziwen's understanding of the pellet recipe caught up with everyone. He soon overtook, leading everyone. While he was cultivating the pellet, he could still give instructions to others on how to perform better. They had to admit the performance just now might have been just Yi Ziwen's prank. They certainly didn't know that Yi Ziwen's rapid progress was actually based entirely on the mysterious space. He had to help him deduce the entire pellet recipe. The alchemy furnace came about a series of noises, and countless spiritual mists emerged from it. Everyone was thrilled. They were not tired during the whole month since they were all cultivators. Even if they didn't sleep for a year, it would not be much of an issue. Not to mention they were surrounded with 100 alchemist masters in addition to witnessing the alchemy technique of alchemy master. How could they be exhausted? All of them felt quite energetic when the pellets were about to be refined. There were even some people who regretted that the process ended up so quickly in the midst of watching the process in fascination. All in all, their gains were not small. When they recalled the truth discussion conference happening later, they somehow reluctantly accepted it. The real gains were still afterward during the truth discussion conference. All alchemists know that this was the most critical time, whether it would succeed or not depending on this. Strange phenomena shrouded them all of a sudden. Among the individual cultivators, 3 violent aura bursted out from the crowd. The 3 seemingly ordinary individual cultivators suddenly rise in revolt with their explosive strength of half-step Great Sage Late. The astonishing strength instantly swept out like 3 hurricanes and went straight towards the Medicine King cauldron. Are they trying to rob Violet Limitless Chi Pellet? No, they are here to ruin this alchemy. We are in the most critical step. We won't be able to sustain any damage. Boom. With a loud bang, a big hand descended from the sky. The 3 masters who had just appeared with astonishing strength were slammed into mincemeat on the spot. They died before many people managed to see how they looked. Everyone took a chill breath. The abrupt change ended without many people even reacting to it. Someone wanted to disturb the pellet refining process. Everyone had this idea in their mind. Suddenly, more people felt chilled in their hearts. Would they vent their anger on individual cultivators because of such reasons and stop them from participating in the truth discussion conference afterward? This could be a real disaster. Soon a tall figure descended, but he was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He had an imposing figure like an iron tower. The man had a grave and stern expression as he glanced coldly at the individual cultivators, as if he was looking at a group of dead people. Chills crept upon the individual cultivator's heart. The 3 half-step Great Sage Late Masters had their life ended with merely his slap. The deterrent brought by the scene was enormous. Many people recognized this man, and could not help but draw a cold breath. Isn't this Grim Mujingya? See. Why would he even appear here? Yeah, isn't he claiming to be a lone wolf, not participating in any sect? Someone couldn't help but say. They said that Mai Jingye owed a favor to old king of Medicine King Valley. But now he came here to help and to repay it. Unexpectedly, they even invited Mu Jingye to help guard the place. This seems to be the reason they are not afraid of us stirring up trouble. At this time, many individual cultivations suddenly understood why the people in Medicine King Valley would invite them, and not to be afraid of their trouble. As a matter of fact, the most taboo thing in alchemy is being disturbed by others. Even if it is just one moment, it is easy to make a huge loss. Alchemy is not tolerant of a little negligence. For example, the 3 half-step great sage masters just now. If they really succeeded, then the violet limitless chi would fail. All efforts would end up in vain. There was such a great character here. No wonder Medicine King Valley was not worried at all. With such a great sage here, it would be impossible to stir up any trouble here unless the other party was also a great sage. What's more, there must be more great sage masters lurking deep in the Medicine King Valley, staring at the outside world. Such an arrangement is foolproof. Yi Shiwen had noticed the movements of the outside world. In fact, when the 3 half-step great sages made a move, he found out that compared with the other 3 great sages present, Mu Jingye was like someone who came out of the sea of blood. These great sages were obviously fed by pellets, plus some luck involved to be able to cross the threshold of great sage. In terms of combat effectiveness, they were actually quite bad. It was the similar reason explaining why Yi Shiwen was able to win the endurance battle with Gongyang Yongfeng, who had stepped into the Great Sage late despite the fact that he was only in half-step Great Sage Intermediate. Although stronger cultivation permeated strong fighting power, Gongyang Yongfeng wasn't good at fighting among the Great Sages. But Yi Shiwen was so keen. Ever since the beginning, his cultivation path was powered by battles. It was not an exaggeration to say that he paved his path with the opponent's blood and corpse. He often cultivated in the wild alone. Therefore, unless it was in the safest state in the Tibetan Star Summit, he always stayed vigilant. When the 3 people just acted rowdy and started cursing, Yi Shiwen was already well prepared. When he was about to make a move, Mu Jingye appeared. For him, there was no need to concentrate and avoid distractions. He already achieved the feat of close cultivation breakthroughs while fighting. There was nothing else worthy to challenge him. Moreover, with the mysterious space, he was already used to multitasking. However, since the danger was resolved, Yi Shiwen no longer paid attention to it. He was determined to acquire this violet limitless chi pellet. As he was injecting his alchemy flame, he was plotting for it secretly. If there was no violet limitless chi pellet, then the time needed and the difficulty to break through the great sage would be hundredfold, or even thousandsfold. If it was a peaceful time, he could take the time to wait. He would break into the great sage sooner or later. He had no doubt about this, but did he have time now? No. The current situation was becoming tenser and tenser, which was the fundamental reason why he had to break through in a short time. Only after breaking through to the great sage could he be considered to have the power to fend himself. With a muffled sound, the entire alchemy furnace began to boil. Countless spiritual mists in addition to medicine scent spread out. A violet pellet flew up with hints of spiritual wisdom imprinted on it. It wanted to fly away in the sky. If it really succeeded, it would have the opportunity to develop his spiritual mind and become a cultivator. It was born with extraordinary roots with great potential to succeed in the future. However, Yao Buping quickly summoned a big gasified hand and put this pellet into a jade box. Everyone was relieved that the process finally finished. All of their gazes were also fixed on that jade box. Helping people to break through from Sage Realm to Great Sage's pellets was also the ultimate goal of their efforts. They could help but envy since that was the only thing they could do. Under the gaze of 2 great sages, Yao Buping and Mu Jingye, nobody would like to take the risk to fight for it. Oh, a huge horn blared, traversing the void from the universe and reaching everyone's ears. Chapter 684. Blood Wolf plunderers attacked. The unknown horn sound penetrated the void from the universe and reached everyone's ears. The sound of the horn sounded like the rebirth of ancient evil deities. The ground was shaking. Even if they were in the Medicine King Valley, they still felt this terrible earthquake. A powerful aura was projected from the universe, as if they were laughing at them unscrupulously. Everyone was shocked. It was the horn of war. The horn sounded only when two big forces collided. Yi Shiwen condensed chi in his eyes and gazed into the celestial. Corpses of Medicine King Valley disciple dropped from the celestial, burning in the atmosphere. The outlook of it seemed like meteorites slipped from the celestial and fell to the great earth. It resembled the doomsday Ragnarok. Everyone was frightened by such a doomsday scene in front of them. What's going on? Is there any terrifying attack on Medicine King Valley? How can this happen? Medicine King Valley is not as big as Meteor Sect, but it can be regarded as a first-class force. There are also a few great sages in the sections. How can the general forces dare to provoke Medicine King Valley? Even though Medicine King Valley is not very good at fighting, ordinary people could not afford to offend them. Which force actually has such great courage to attack Medicine King Valley? Some people with flexible minds could relate this scene to Violet Limitless Chi Pellet. There was no movement at all, but now the scene suddenly appeared. But before they continued to ponder further, a huge blood aura came crushing downward from a distance. Apparently, it originated from the universe. Everyone gazed at that blood aura. It took the shape of Blood Wolf with domineering auras surged every corner in the scene. Someone responded immediately. Blood Wolf Plunderer. When he screamed, everyone took a cold breath with their bodies trembling. Chills crept upon their heart. Blood Wolf Plunderer was a taboo in the nearby star region. No one knew when Blood Wolf Plunderer emerged in the starry sky. They said that Blood Wolf Plunderer had more than 100,000 members. Among them, there were countless sage realm masters. There were quite a number of great sages too. Blood Wolf Plunderer dared not to mess with behemoths like Meteor Sect. However, other sects would meet their end if they encountered Blood Wolf Plunderer. Moreover, occurrence of mass murdering in sects happened many times in the past despite the entire force of those sects added up to hundred thousands of people. All of them were slaughtered. Dead and silence reigned the entire planet in the end. The faction station's planetary spirits were all siphoned out. It eventually turned into a Death Star. The cruel means was unimaginable. And most importantly, they didn't keep anyone alive at all. Those who encountered them had no good ending. In the nearby faction of the Starry Sky, there were several joint operations against the Blood Wolf Plunderer, but every time they had no way to cause a fatal threat to the Blood Wolf Plunderer. Afterwards, there was a crazy revenge of the Blood Wolves. Some sects were exterminated, and finally Meteor Sect was disturbed. However, the Blood Wolf Plunderer escaped in the end and hid themselves into a chaotic star. That place was chaotic that spiritual senses could not permeate through it. Except the Blood Wolf Plunderer, the outsiders had no way to survive in it, even Meteor Sect as well. They could be regarded as horrifying existence that even stopped children's weeping aloud. Unexpectedly, the crowd now encountered them. Blood Wolf Plunderer launched their attack at Medicine King Valley. Never mind those individual cultivators, even those of Medicine King Valley disciple had ugly faces. In the distant celestial, there were dense figures everywhere painting a blood-red formation. All these Blood Wolf Plunderers were riding on blood wolves. The scene was terrifying and violent. With their strength to patrol the starry sky for so many years without being destroyed, their power was indeed extraordinary. These Blood Wolf Plunderers formed into groups with battle roars that trembled the sky. There was nothing superfluous. They just wanted to paint the entire Medicine King Valley with blood. Many people's faces changed greatly, because they found that they couldn't even send out the messenger for help. The whole planet was enclosed by array series. Not even the slightest message could slip through. This was also Blood Wolf Plunderer's common means to prevent forces from sending out help-seeking messages to the outside world. Hence, often when many forces were found to be exterminated, it was already a long time ago. The Blood Wolf Plunderer had long escaped into the starry sky. Kill them all. Defend Medicine King Valley. Yao Buping shouted loudly, and there were many roars of Medicine King Valley disciple around him. Many figures also rose up in the Medicine King Valley. There were people shouting in addition to the sound of horses. In this sudden battle, the Medicine King Valley disciple chose to fight till dead. Kill. Kill the Blood Wolf Plunderer bastards. Not only the Medicine King Valley disciple, but even many people among those individual cultivators echoed and roared. The morale was great with battle roars surging to the sky. It was not that they really had such a high consciousness, nor they had a deep hatred with Blood Wolf Plunderer which led to the deathmatch. The fundamental reason was that they wanted to protect themselves. Everyone knew that Blood Wolf Plunderers had great strength and carried bloody deeds. Wherever they go, they would not allow any survivors. Hence, the individual cultivators had no choice. If they failed to repel Blood Wolf Plunderer, only death awaited them. So this time, no matter whether they were harboring ill intention or any other ideas, they had to be united when facing the Blood Wolf Plunderer. It is a death match. We have no way out. Everyone knows the Blood Wolf Plunders means. No matter whether we are willing or not, bloodsheds are bound to happen. If we don't join the death match, we will be executed. Someone shouted, inspiring countless warriors. With the situation developed into this stage, there was no space for hesitation. If there were other forces, there could be space for negotiation. After all, they were individual cultivators who had little to do with Medicine King Valley. Unless the opponent wanted to offend all of the individual cultivators and the connection behind them, they would not be too overboard. After all, these individual cultivators seem inconspicuous. One or two of them did not really amount much. However, big numbers win the game. When they were grouped up, it would be a terrifying force that no one could ignore. However, having merciless Blood Wolf Plunderer as their opponent, there was no room for maneuver. There were still many people who were depressed. If they knew it, they wouldn't come. Who knew they would encounter an attack by Blood Wolf Plunderer? However, at this time they didn't have time to think more about it. Numerous disciplines in the Medicine King Valley flew out with battle intentions surging to the sky. They had to defend their homeland. Most importantly, they had to fight till death and defeat the Blood Wolf Plunderer to survive. These Blood Wolf Plunderers are going to kill us. Even if we die, we have to drag them along to hell. Slain them, let this be an one-way trip for these bastards. Kill them all. Don't let anyone flee. Medicine King Valley's disciples' morale elevated to the sky. Some even roared with iron will to pursue Blood Wolf Plunderer to their home base and exterminate them. However, everyone knew that this would probably be impossible. After all, if Blood Wolf Plunderer were easily exterminated, then they would not live to this day. A series of war horns sounded. Arrays activated in series in the Medicine King Valley, covering the main base of the entire Medicine King Valley. With the sound of tearing, there was a crack. It was seemingly a space torn apart from the middle. The scene was just like how a beautiful painting got torn apart. A bloody spear was shot down from the celestial. This bloody spear, which was hundreds of feet long, was like a pillar that supported heaven. It swooshed down to the scene. Boom. The entire mountain gate array shook wildly. Even the entire main array was a little disturbed, not to mention those sub-arrays. Wherever the spear passed, countless arrays were punctured in a flash. Those disciples hid in the arrays thought it was safe, but they were annihilated under this spear. Each swoosh could annihilate hundreds of disciplines. Who dares to attack Medicine King Valley? Yao Buping finally moved. With a shrill shriek due to airflow, he appeared in the celestial. A gasified big hand reached out to the crack, demonstrating the strength of a terrifying master of great sage late fully. Boom. That space seemed to collapse in an instant. Chaos funneled out onto the Blood Wolf Plunderer's masses. In that moment, what was grasped by that big hand turned into a blood mist. Medicine King Valley Yao Buping. You are quite worthy. Amidst the chaos, collapsed airspace and a tall blood figure appeared from the ranks of Blood Wolf Plunderer with sinister laughs. It was a tall man about 30 years old with a menacing face and fierce expression. He was equipped with bloody armor, sitting on a huge blood wolf taller than 7 meters. Its bloody eyes and 4 claws that cracked the spaces were extremely terrifying. The head of Blood Wolf Plunder, Blood Lord. Yao Buping stared at the man coldly, and said a name that made countless people tremble. Blood Lord. This name terrified everyone in this starry sky. Those who mentioned the frightening name also quivered in fear. My Medicine King Valley has no injustice with you Blood Wolf plunderers. Why attack Medicine King Valley for no reason? Yao Buping gritted his teeth and uttered his doubt. Yeah. Why did you come to attack us? A Medicine King Valley disciple roared. Indeed, although they were prepared for a desperate battle, they were also quite baffled. Why would they be under attack? Both sides mind their own business. Why would the Blood Wolf plunderer organize such a great skirmish on them? Bloodlord sneered. Does the Blood Wolf plunderer need a reason? Do we need to tell you why? But if you are willing to surrender collectively for our Blood Wolf plunderer alchemy, this uncle can let you go. However, we will only accept half of them, so if you want to survive, you exchange other people's heads for it. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 685. Collapse of the defense. Hearing Bloodlord's words made everyone's hair stand on end. With just a few words, this Bloodlord wanted everyone to go to the extent of killing each other. Who would not want to survive? This was especially true for those warriors who had cultivated hard to reach this level. TSK. Just this sentence alone made them distrust each other. The name of Bloodlord is not in vain indeed. Yi Mo said astoundingly, appearing on Yi Zaiwen's right shoulder. Yi Mo's charming appearance looked so cute that no one would believe that he was an unparalleled demon. He's a good young talent to be a demon. If he gets proper training in demon domain, he can probably be a great demon. Ha! Yi Shiwen nodded. This Bloodlord was a manipulator. A seemingly rampant remark actually made the entire Medicine King Valley fall into silence. No wonder the Blood Wolf plunderer could survive tenaciously among the siege of many forces. The leader was really extraordinary. This is a good opportunity indeed. The more chaotic the situation, the greater your chance of getting the violet limitless chi pellet in the end. Don't believe his words. Are there any survivors wherever Blood Wolf plunderer went? He just wanted to instigate us to kill each other, yelled Yao Buping. Everyone nodded their heads, but the incident just now went deep into their hearts. Who wouldn't want to live if they could? Kill them. Kill these damned Blood Wolf plunderer. They will never let us go. We can only fight to death and chase them out in order to survive. At this time, Tian Butong's roar attracted everyone's heart back. Everyone was attracted by the possible chance of survival just now. As they thought through it, they realized what Tian Butong said was right. There were no survivors wherever the Blood Wolf plunderer passed. It was simply impossible. What a pity. I really wanted to give you all a chance. Our Blood Wolf plunderer is also lacking alchemy masters. But since you can't tell the good from the bad, then all of you should go to hell. Bloodlord showed a regretful face before roaring ferociously. Of course, Medicine King Valley's disciples were not going to wait helplessly for death. One after another, ancient arrays buried deep in the planet were revived and activated. If it was not for the protection of these arrays, the entire planet would be exploded by this terrible collision. Blast them! Someone from Blood Wolf plunderer screamed, and his sound came through the entire void. All of a sudden, the entire sky was densely packed with long arrows spewing out like a layer of blood-colored cloud, and instantly fell down. Poof, poof, poof. Each blood arrow broke through the defensive arrays, and it fell like raindrops. Every blood arrow could blast a hill. The power was really unbelievably scary. Ah! 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 The Medicine King Valley disciples were shrieking miserably. It was a bloodbath with lives getting butchered one after another. We have to fight back, roared Yao Buping. The whole mountain gate began to shake violently. A series of massive forces surged in it, and a series of spiritual veins swam in it. It turned into a divine light which was as thick as a water tank through the arrays and shot out. Boom, boom, boom. Wherever the divine light passed, countless Blood Wolf plunderer warriors and Blood Wolf riders were bombed to death, leaving no residues behind. This was a confrontation between two terrifying forces, and no one was spared. Countless attacks burst like raindrops from the sky at every moment. The aftermath of the battle shook thousands of miles away. The Blood Wolf plunderer was very well prepared this time. They had exterminated numerous sects and gained experience. So they also had various martial instruments that shone with unimaginable brightness. The sky was densely packed with the Bloodwolf plunderers' battle cry. There were at least more than hundreds of thousands of soldiers covering the entire sky. Numerous Medicine King Valley disciples were slightly dumbfounded to witness this scene. So many Bloodwolf plunderer. It is really scary. How come there are so many Bloodwolf plunderer? Could it be that all Bloodwolf plunderers sally forth in full strength to attack us this time? There were some Medicine King Valley disciples who were screaming miserably and roaring furiously. Within Yi Zaiwen's vision, he saw a blood flower spattered. A Medicine King Valley disciple was pierced through the air by a huge blood arrow, and the blood blossomed into a splendid blood flower. The person was nailed to death on a mountain top. In the blink of an eye, Bloodwolf plunderers' warriors actually pushed their front line just before them with their battle cry shrouded every direction in the scene. Medicine King Valley's side was unwilling to be inferior too. The divine lights were continually shot out, and it was unusually spectacular. This battle caught Medicine King Valley off guard. There were many things that were not prepared. As time passed, the arrays were constantly revived and joined the battle every minute and every second. Within a short period of time, Medicine King Valley gradually had the upper hand. After all, this place was their sect. They stood the geographic advantage and had many favorable conditions that Bloodwolf plunderer did not have. Both sides were totally immersed in the battle at this time. Within just a few minutes, thousands of masters from both sides had died in the battle. It could be said that there were countless deaths and injuries, but most of them were Medicine King Valley's defenders. Although Medicine King Valley's strength was quite good, how could it be comparable to Bloodwolf plunderer who turned out in full strength? They were the real horrifying masters who massacred countless people to the point of the blood dyeing their clothes red. This was also the origin of their name, Bloodwolf plunderer. Dang, dang, dang. A series of loud bell sounds rang through the entire Medicine King Valley station, waking up more masters in close cultivation. Numerous mighty aura gushed out of the close cultivation, and various martial instruments, as well as divine soldiers, skimmed over the sky, killing the Bloodwolf plunderer. Kill. Suddenly, a kill sound thundered in the air. A real bloody battle was about to begin. One party intended to exterminate the entire sect, and killed with total disregard for life. The other party had no choice but to fight desperately for a chance of survival. Hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderer cavalries held control over the entire station firmly, that even a fly couldn't fly out. Roar! The Bloodwolf that Bloodlord sat on finally made a move. A terrifying and furious roar turned into a series of shock waves blasting out, instantly shattering countless arrays. This was also a great sage-level Bloodwolf, and it was absolutely daunting. Countless spiritual energy began to gather in frenzy. The Bloodwolf opened its big mouth and absorbed countless spiritual energy. In an instant, a dazzling beam of light was launched downward. The sky seemed to darken all at once. It was as though night had fallen and it was pitch black. The space was all shattered. The whole mountain gate was shaking violently, and the mountains collapsed. Numerous Medicine King Valley disciples shrieked in horror, and were killed in the collapse. After all, it was a true great sage attacking. So the attacks from the average sage realm and legend could not rival it at all. The entire mountain protective array was blasted open. Bloodlord took the lead and rushed in by himself first. Kill them all. Bloodwolf plunderer followed and charged in succession. It was an astonishing sight, like 10,000 stampeding horses. The entire mountain protective array was breached in an instant. The Bloodwolf plunderer was too strong. At this time, all the masters finally understood why the Bloodwolf plunderer was so famous and could exterminate countless sections. Such a powerful strength could exterminate a major sect indeed, as long as they did not provoke the presiding super-elite characters like those transcendent masters. Otherwise, no one could probably stop them in the entire universe. The entire mountain protective array disintegrated all at once, and countless of the disciples holding up the mountain protective array were shocked to death on the spot. Yao Buping was pop-eyed. After a loud roar, he rushed out directly and turned into a stream of light bolting out. The horrifying aura of the great sage swept out. Many Bloodwolf plunderer masters were directly swept, and turned into a cluster of blood mist on the spot. Although Yao Buping was not as strong as Bloodlord, The extent of his strength was unimaginable. A great sagelate's strength was no joke. No one has ever dared to attack us at Medicine King Valley. Damn Bloodwolf plunderer, I want you to pay the price. Yao Buping screamed and slammed into Bloodlord. The two mighty masters were like two structures crashing together in the universe. The staggering power annihilated the atoms in an instant, setting off an overpowering wind in a frenzy spree which rippled waves after waves. A scary mushroom cloud rose suddenly. The dazzling light blinded the lights of countless people. In this terrifying collision, Yao Buping was thrusted backward thousands of feet continuously. When he managed to stop, he looked at Bloodlord wearily. At this time, Bloodlord's horrifying aura also constantly climbed up to the peak bit by bit. Compared with Yao Buping's great sagelate's strength, Bloodlord was stronger. He was actually a great sage minor mastery. Seeing that even Yao Buping was in an inferior position in the face of Bloodlord, everyone was utterly dispirited. Even the most powerful person among them, Yao Buping, was more inferior than Bloodlord, not to mention them. Everyone, let's attack together. If we can't kill this damned Bloodlord, no one can walk out alive today. Tian Butong yelled, and charged towards Bloodlord too. Everyone present had a solemn expression. They knew that if they could not kill Bloodlord, then none of them would be able to escape. If they killed Bloodlord, then other Bloodwolf plunderer would be of no concern. Hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderers were a lot indeed. Even great sages would be frightened to see this scene. But the number of Medicine King Valley disciples was not less than this as well. The other two great sages, Qing Xuanzi and Mu Jingye, also nodded their heads and agreed with this view. Based on their personal strength, each of them was far weaker than Bloodlord, who was a great sage minor mastery. They could only go all out and fight by outnumbering them to see if they could defeat Bloodlord. At this time, everyone was ashen-faced and prepared for a final battle. Only Yi Zaiwen's face looked normal at this time. He was the calmest among all others. Even if it was in the face of hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderer, his facial expression was the same. 1. It means a person is very frightened or shocked. Chapter 686. He is going to make a breakthrough. It was not that he could annihilate these hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderer with only his strength. Even with his strength, it was impossible to achieve such a level. This possibility was only limited to the masters of the transcendent realm. However, despite his inability to annihilate these hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderer, at least he was able to escape. Not even the temple master of the Soul Destruction Temple was able to hold him. He never thought that the warriors of the hundreds of thousands of Bloodwolf plunderer would be even more frightening than the temple master of the Soul Destruction Temple. In any case, he was confident of his ability to escape. Of course, there was nothing for him to be nervous about. Haha, do you team up with many people to gang up on one person? When did you, the self-proclaimed member of the prestigious and upright family, learn to do something like that? A brash voice roared from the sky and another boisterous voice gushed out. It turned out to be the Honorable Great Sage, with a vigorous aura, seemingly not from beneath Yao Buping. However, he had the appearance of a young man in his 20s while wearing a blood-red robe. His bloody red long hair, swaying in the wind, appearing ostentatiously in front of everyone. His hand was holding a long sword with blood on it. It was unknown as to how many people were slaughtered by this sword. Suddenly, there were changes in the facial expressions of the people simultaneously. It was already hard for them to hold off against the Blood Lord. What's more, there was a top expert who was no less superior than Yao Buping. Together, these two people could exterminate them. Many people even wailed in anguish in their hearts that their chance of survival was gone with these two people here. Some people had even recognized this young man. He was no ordinary citizen but the Blood Hangman, the second in charge of the Bloodwolf plunderer, compared to the Blood Lord, whose reputation preceded him. The Blood Hangman had also made a name for himself. Furthermore, he was notoriously famous for torturing his opponents sadistically. Compared to the Blood Lord, he was much worse. Let me handle this person. You guys deal with the Blood Lord. At this moment, a distinct yet cold voice suddenly came out. Everyone turned their head and looked around. However, who they saw was Yi Shiwen, who had arrived behind their back when they were not looking. Many people were a little dumbfounded. At this moment, not even the arrival of the great sage can resolve the situation. Would it not be whimsical for a half-step great sage like him to be able to defeat the notoriously violent yet outstanding blood hangman? That was not a competition of power. The blood hangman of the late great sage could even kill the half-step great sage, Yi Shiwen, with just one finger. However, unlike other people, there were expressions of slight joy on both Yao Buping and Tian Butong's face. Unlike others, they had both witnessed how the Gongyang Yongfeng of the late great sage was exhausted to death by Yi Shiwen with their own eyes. In other words, even if he did not possess the capability to defeat a great sage late warrior, he definitely had the power to stall the great sage late warrior. For the Medicine King Valley, which was now in a dire state, it was already difficult for them to deal with the Blood Lord. Moreover, they still were up against the Blood Hangman, who was equally strong. If no one could stall the Blood Hangman, then what awaited them would be a lopsided massacre with simply no chance of retaliation at all. In the Blood Wolf Plunderer, there were not many great sage. However, when it came to competition between these experts, the quantity was not what enabled them to win. When the 4 great sages on their side were up against the Blood Lord, the possibility of victory was none to nil. However, as the event had developed to this stage, they could only go all out at the risk of their lives just for the sake of survival. Also, at this moment, some people volunteered to stall the Blood Hangman. Of course, this was the best idea. It was best to stall the Blood Hangman for as long as possible. If the stall was prolonged until they managed to kill the Blood Lord, then this crisis in Medicine King Valley would be truly resolved. Just you. The Blood Hangman tilted his head and looked at Yi Shiwen. There was an unimaginably wicked smile on his face. It seems that I have withdrawn from worldly affairs for too long. Did anyone forget my feats? As he was talking, the Blood Hangman started to make a move. His figure leaped to the vast sky and appeared in front of Yi Shiwen in an instant. He raised his sword and struck it, unleashing monstrous blood waves. The long sword had already reached in front of Yi Shiwen. When Yi Shiwen was about to be sliced into half by the sword, Yi Shiwen moved and raised his hand, turning his entire arm into a sword and deflected the attack. Invincible sword. He let out a scream, accompanied by a burst of engulfing and raising golden deities that knock against the monstrous blood waves violently. Boom. This collision had instantly caused a big crack on the void, with the point of collision being the center of the crack. Like a spider web, the crack spread through the void in all directions. In the endless cyclone, Yi Zaiwen's figure had retreated 10 feet from it before he landed on his feet. During the previous collision, there was already a clear distinction. It was obvious that Yi Shiwen still had room for improvement in cultivating his skills. However, even so, his current ability was sufficient to surprise everyone in Medicine King Valley. At first, they did not even think that Yi Shiwen, who was a half-step great sage, could actually stop the Blood Hangman. After all, the Blood Hangman was the ferocious great sage late expert. Yao Buping did not even dare to announce that he was able to defeat this frightening opponent, even if he encountered him. Everyone had finally come to an understanding as to why Yao Buping would make Yi Shiwen take the lead at this moment. It was not Yao Buping who made a mistake. Yi Shiwen did have such strength. Not only did he have a different kind of alchemy flame, but he did have the strength that was on an equal level to the great sage. Although they were all astonished as to how a half-step great sage could possess such a terrible strength that was equally matched to the great sage, they did not have the time to continue thinking about it. Of course, they would have hoped that Yi Zaiwen's strength would become stronger and better. On the other side, the face of the Blood Hangman, who was just fooling around, became solemn. At first, it seemed that he was just fooling around with an ant, and not taking Yi Shiwen seriously at all. He is just a half-step great sage. In his mind, it was not any different from the ants, but unexpectedly, this ant had given him a different surprise. This was not an ordinary ant. There was something extraordinary about it, which in turn sparked his interest. However, his interest in it was merely just a thought. As for the upcoming battle, it was something that did not come up in his mind. The previous blow had made him realize that the ant in front of his eyes was unexpectedly powerful, but there was still a huge gap between the ant when compared to him, who was already in the stage of the great sage late. After showing interest, there was a merciless expression on his face. His favorite thing to do was to extort his prey into desperate straits, and then witness their expression of desperation, just like the Medicine King Valley in its current situation. However, to his surprise, Yi Shiwen, who fell into a disadvantageous position, continued to unleash attacks towards him directly as opposed to remaining in his position. It was almost immediately after he was being repelled. He was already prepared to launch an attack. His unwavering attack was impressive. Interesting. Let me see what is different about this ant then. Ha 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 ha. The blood hangman laughed, rushed towards Yi Shiwen, and had an intense battle with him in a different location. Both sides collided continuously in the void. Wherever they went, everything was crushed into fragments, whether it was the Medicine King Valley's disciples or the Blood Wolf Plunderer's warriors. The hand-to-hand combat of both sides was like collisions of two huge stars in the sky. The terrible shockwaves produced from the violent collisions made everybody give up hope for the moment. In the void, Yi Shiwen was repeatedly beaten into retreat, but he recklessly charged towards the blood hangman. He was expelled back numerous times until he vomited blood. However, in the blink of an eye, he was fighting with the blood hangman as if nothing had happened to him. Countless disciples of the Medicine King Valley admired him. Regardless of their past perspectives of Yi Shiwen, they could not help but admire Yi Shiwen. If it were them doing so, they definitely could not do it. They could see that Yi Ziwen's strength was obviously no match for the blood hangman, but he still charged towards the blood hangman numerous times. This was not something any ordinary people could do. Many people witnessed Yi Ziwen's combat skills. They could not help but felt thrilled by it. Master Long was fighting the Great Sage with the strength of half-step Great Sage. How could they let him down? Especially Tian Butong, Yao Buping, and a few other people who rushed straight towards the Blood Lord. Compared to the Blood Hangman, the Blood Lord who strode over the Great Sage and young Master was more like a mountain lying in front of them. It was literally impossible to cross over, which made people despair, but they still had to cross over. With the destruction of the entire protection array, countless Blood Wolf plunderers fell from the sky, spreading the fire of war throughout the entire Medicine King Valley. Battle cries were heard everywhere. The disciples of the Medicine King Valley and the disciple of the Blood Wolves were fighting against each other in a group. The Blood Wolves plunderers wanted to destroy the entire Medicine King Valley, while the disciples of the Medicine King Valley were fighting for their survival. Both sides fought desperately with their opponents and did not leave any leeway. In the sky, the fights happening on both battlefields were the most vicious. On one side was the battle with Bloodlord against Yao Buping, Tian Butong, and the others, while on the other side was the battle between Yi Shiwen and the Blood Hangman. Although the battle between both of them could not be regarded as evenly matched, both sides were in a state of stalemate in terms of fight status. The battle soon transversed to the Celestial. The huge troops that were deployed by the Blood Wolf Plunderer were turned into dust from the shockwave created in the fight between both of them. The troops were unable to stop the shockwave from the fight at the sage level. Soon, the Blood Hangman had discovered an important point, which was no matter how he attacked and beat up Yi Shiwen, even till Yi Shiwen vomited blood, Yi Shiwen was able to retaliate immediately as if there was nothing wrong with him. It was like an unyielding cockroach, which made people feel uncomfortable and disgusted. No matter how it was hit badly, it was still fine. However, the Blood Hangman had thought of the reason in an instant. Could it be that this person had martial techniques that heal his wounds? Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly lit up because as he was living a life where he was constantly at war with others, protecting his life became important to him. If he was able to acquire such a powerful martial technique to heal himself, the safety of his own life would be indefinitely secured. Kid, as long as you surrender your Bodis healing technique, I will spare your life and take you in as my slave. Blood Hangman roared. Do you get to decide? In the midst of Yi Shiwen being expelled back, his eyes did not flinch, not even the slightest. He was even more determined to fight. With a rise in his Bodis aura, he was about to make a breakthrough. Chapter 687. Half-step great sage late Yi Shiwen just wanted to let out an excited yell right now. His power was boiling like an unimaginable force was flowing in his body. He was at the critical juncture. He was one step away from entering the half-step great sage late. To him, the last battle with Gongyang Yongfeng was a pity. He almost stepped into half-step great sage late. Without stepping into half-step great sage late, he had no way to fend himself against the great sage late. It felt like the brakes were pulled right just as he was about to sprint. This feeling made him feel so depressed that he could spit blood. However, he had no choice. Even his opponent Gongyang Yongfeng had been worn out to death by him. Even if he was not content, he had no other choice. He initially wanted to wait until after he returned to true martial school and closed cultivation before breaking into half-step great sage late. However, there was another opportunity placed in front of him now, which was this blood hangman. This blood hangman was more powerful than Gongyang Yongfeng. Even among the great sage late, he was also considered an ace. It was also due to this that Yi Shiwen proposed to challenge the blood hangman one-on-one. On the one hand, it was to hinder the blood hangman. On the other hand, he wanted to use the blood hangman to hone himself and make himself break into the half-step great sage late. If other people knew, he was afraid that they would be frightened to death. Gongyang Yongfeng was a different matter. Although Gongyang Yongfeng was notoriously famous, after all, he was already old and could no longer be compared to his past self. And in the end, Yi Shiwen just wore Gongyang Yongfeng out to death. He depleted Gongyang Yongfeng's vital energy and blood until he died, but he did not kill Gongyang Yongfeng. What's more, this blood hangman was more tyrannical than Gongyang Yongfeng. Using him to achieve a breakthrough was simply looking for death for ordinary people. They would be killed by just the press of one of his fingers. Who do you think you are? Yi Shiwen replied coldly. The will to fight in his eyes became fiercer, flaming ablaze as if there were stars in them. His Bodhis momentum also climbed little by little, and it soon climbed to the peak of half-step great sage intermediate. He finally came to this place again, 1 inch away from stepping into half-step great sage late. Less nonsense. If you have the ability, just kill me and get it. Yi Shiwen said with his mouth, but his feet did not stop moving. He suddenly took a step and violently shot out, turning into a golden light. He rushed to the blood hangman. Their battle had transversed to the universe. The terrifying momentum tore the space apart. A pair of golden wings appeared behind Yi Shiwen, and he appeared in front of the blood hangman in an instant. With a long sword in his hand glinting brightly, he slashed his sword toward blood hangman. That's fast. The jest was finally gone from the blood hangman's face. Surprise flashed in his blood-red eyes. It was his first time feeling Yi Zaiwen's extreme speed. Even the Soul Destruction Temple Master couldn't catch up with his speed, and finally let him go. That was a great master of the Sage Realm, who was more powerful than a Blood Lord, let alone a blood hangman. The two parties were not at the same level at all. It was conceivable how fast Yi Zaiwen's speed was. Immediately, in an instant's effort, Yi Shiwen had already attacked him with his sharp sword approaching blood hangman's face. Clang! A loud sound of metal clashing was heard. Wave after wave of terrifying shock waves swept out from the middle of the place. The chi of two sharp swords suddenly collided in the air. This was the battle of two sword masters. By the skin of his teeth, the blood hangman finally blocked Yi Zaiwen's attack. He couldn't help but feel chills down his spine. If he hadn't been careful and vigilant just now, he was afraid he would have really been hit by this ant's sword. However, without waiting for him to think about it, Yi Zaiwen's offense kept pressing forward. He turned into a bowl of golden light and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind the blood hangman. He swung his sword again and lightning struck. Clang! 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 Boom! 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 The range of the two's combat was getting bigger. Yi Shiwen no longer launched attacks at the risk of his life. Instead, he used the speed that he excelled the most in. The so-called, in the world of martial arts, only speed is invincible, was greatly reflected in Yi Shiwen. The blood hangman's strength was much more tyrannical than Yi Shiwen, but he had no way to kill Yi Shiwen because Yi Shiwen was too fast. He was so fast to the point where it was hard to even get caught. Especially in battle, Yi Shiwen did not begrudge chi. He constantly hastened the storm wings on his back to release storm power, violently slamming it down on the blood hangman's body. Although it could not gravely harm the blood hangman at all, it made him battered. Roar! The blood hangman yelled an angry roar, shaking all directions. He was beyond furious. He never thought he would be so embarrassed by an ant he did not consider worthy at all. The crimson blood aura on his body surged even more. The bloody air instantly scattered out, one circle after another. It was extremely terrifying. In the middle of each blood wave was interspersed with countless people screaming and howling, all of whom were killed by him. He extracted their resentful spirits, and then sacrificed them to his martial arts. There were so many resentful spirits. It was unclear if there were 100,000s or millions. He had really murdered many people. No wonder there was rumors about how he liked to torture and kill. His fetish in torturing people to death had already twisted his heart. Until now, those who were tortured to death by him had become his helpers, making his martial arts more terrifying. Circles of resentful spirits swept out, swallowing and shattering everything they encountered. It was extremely terrifying. Caught off guard for a moment, Yi Shiwen was also affected. His body was densely covered with hundreds of resentful spirits, all of which were old hateful spirits who had been dead for who knew how many years. They were fierce and abnormal. They were fed fresh blood by the blood hangman, and had become ferocious demons. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted. A golden divinity instantly covered Yi Ziwen's whole body. Every drop of golden divinity seemed to have a deity chanting inside it. The divinity that had been merged with who knew how many deities began to resurrect at that very moment. They turned into all kinds of deities, all of which were different kinds of beast gods. It was like each deity had resurrected to descend on the world. Those resentful spirits were created using the power of Yin in heaven and earth, and contaminated with fresh blood. They feared the power of Yang of the most, and divinity was simply such a power. They were killed by the deities that divinity produced in no time, but the little time it took was enough. The blood hangman had grasped this opportunity and launched himself over. In a fight between experts, it only took a moment to settle with a victor. Clang! The blood-dyed long sword glimmered with intense crimson was slashed downward in haste. Yi Shiwen could not evade it. The blood hangman's blood sealed off his surroundings. He couldn't tell his direction in the universe. They were all sealed, preventing him from escaping. Die! The blood hangman shouted coldly. His facial expression was quite ferocious. He was a very prideful man. It made him very depressed to have been so embarrassed by an ant he had never considered worthy. Now he finally had the chance to kill this ant on the spot to vent his hatred. Boom! Yi Shiwen raised his sword and blocked it. The blood hangman's terrifying power completely slammed down on him without mercy. The terrifying power even caused Yi Shiwen, equipped with the domineering body, to crouch down, getting totally crushed by it. Luckily, he had the protection of the domineering body. If it were an ordinary person, he would have been crushed to death already. It wasn't because the domineering body was weak. On the contrary, if not for the domineering body, Yi Shiwen would be killed on the spot. However, his realm and the blood hangman's realm had an overwhelming gap. If the gaps between their realms were closer, it was unlikely that the situation would end up like this. However, the blood hangman's power rolled down in waves like the tide, trying to pulverize Yi Ziwen's entire defense. Both Yi Ziwen's eyes turned red. His will to fight was like fire that wanted to burn through the world. The golden divinity on his body also billowed up in waves to resist the crushing of the power of this blood wave. The two insane forces were crushing each other, colliding wildly around Yi Shiwen. The Guanren Sutra inside Yi Shiwen was revolving at a terrifying speed. The formed galaxy was also spinning at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. It should be known that the galaxy formed by the Guanren Sutra in Yi Ziwen's body was an exact copy of the real universe's galaxy. Therefore, on normal days, the revolution of the entire galaxy could be said to be quite slow. The revolution within the galaxy was still considered fast, but the rotation of the entire galaxy was difficult to detect with the naked eye. It was just a little bit, but it really had the feeling of 10,000 years passing in the blink of an eye in the universe. However, it was now revolving at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. It could be seen how crazy the Guanren Sutra had gotten. Yi Shiwen had already tried his best. The cells in his body were collapsing one by one, but were repaired by the Phoenix regeneration technique. Ah! Yi Shiwen yelled. The momentum of his body had climbed to the peak and finally broke through. It rose insanely, stepping directly from half-step Great Sage Intermediate into half-step Great Sage Late. Boom! The blood sword that was about to sever Yi Zaiwen's shoulder was bounced off by a frightening force. The impact almost tore the blood hangman's hand apart. He just gaped in shock at Yi Shiwen, whose momentum had increased sharply in front of him. He actually achieved a breakthrough. He didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would actually break through at the most critical moment. Yi Shiwen broke through, which was to say, he had just become a whetstone for others to hone themselves. How could I become a whetstone? He still found it hard to believe. Chapter 688. It'll crush you if someone said that Blood Hangman would be used as a whetstone previously. Blood Hangman would definitely not believe it. What was a whetstone? The purpose of a whetstone was to help him achieve a breakthrough to a higher level. In other words, the opponent's strength was far inferior to him. Otherwise, how could a knife be sharpened? But if Yi Zaiwen's strength was not as good as Blood Hangman, then Yi Shiwen was even less likely to be his opponent. Maybe he could slam Yi Shiwen to death with a slap. The strength gap between Great Sage Intermediate and Great Sage Late was simply too large to be imagined. A Great Sage Intermediate simply could not match against him at all. Blood Hangman could slam Yi Shiwen to death directly, because he was not an ordinary Great Sage Late. The incident of being used as a whetstone could never happen to Blood Hangman. But now this kind of thing really happened. Yi Shiwen really used Blood Hangman as a whetstone to hone his own sharp edge, and even broke through completely. For Blood Hangman, this was basically a miracle. It's impossible. Blood Hangman was stupefied. He couldn't believe it at all. In fact, if a typical Great Sage Intermediate really wanted to use Blood Hangman as a whetstone in order to break through to the Great Sage Late, then this person was doomed. Blood Hangman would beat him to death in just a few moves. But Yi Shiwen had the Phoenix regeneration technique, which was the fundamental reason why he dared to perform a breakthrough in the battle and use Blood Hangman as a whetstone. An average person simply did not have such confidence and strength. Yi Shiwen could heal his injury completely in the blink of an eye, so he could be fearless. If there was no Phoenix regeneration technique, he would be killed even if he had a tyrant body. Yi Zaiwen's momentum was still soaring continuously, and his eyes were burning with full fighting spirit. "It's your turn," said Yi Shiwen slowly. After breaking through the half-step Great Sage Late, he only felt that his strength had changed drastically with warm currents circulating in his body. It was a far cry compared with just now, which was simply different. He could also feel that his tyrant body had reached the peak of the 7th level. If he could break through the Great Sage, he could probably enter the 8th level finally. By that time, his physical body would experience a drastic change again, and there would be a qualitative gap. Although he had not reached the extreme, it would be different again by that time. His tyrant body technique had not broken through for a long time. After all, his tyrant body was powerful enough relatively speaking, and each level was a qualitative change. It was not just based on the change in strength brought by the boost in power, but a real qualitative change. There used to be a bitter battle with the Titan body previously, but Yi Shiwen even crushed the fierce deity True Body now, which was comparable to the Titan body in the past. This was enough to prove that his tyrant body was improving at an unimaginable speed. He could feel that when his tyrant body was cultivated to the extreme, when the tyrant body was truly formed, he could even rip apart deities and demons. Furthermore, this was his own improved version of the tyrant body, which he thought to be more powerful than the original one. All this must wait for the test of time. Boom! Yi Shiwen moved in the midst of a sonic boom, and his body smashed countless air particles directly. The huge magnitude of force made an unimaginable explosive sound. He burst out in an instant, and rushed to the front of the Blood Hangman. Yi Shiwen had a martial sword in his hand, which was truly a martial sword that he condensed with his own swordsmanship. Although it was based on the elderly swordsmanship, the sword would always have unimaginable power in Yi Zaiwen's hands. The martial sword slashed with the speed of light, tearing open the vast sky. It was terrifying like no other. Dang! Blood Hangman blocked the rising sword. Yi Zaiwen's speed was way faster than before. Yi Shiwen did not activate his demon's wings, but he was already much more rapid than before with only the speed of his own martial arts. This breakthrough had led to an unimaginable breakthrough of Yi Zaiwen's overall strength. This almost made Blood Hangman unable to react timely. One could imagine the extent to which Yi Zaiwen's speed will soar after his demon's wings were activated. If he was hunted down by Soul Destruction Temple's master again at this time, then it would not be the same as the last time, where he was injured badly at the end and almost died on the spot. Originally, Blood Hangman already felt that Yi Zaiwen's power was overwhelming. Every time he crossed his sword with Yi Shiwen, he had to utilize his entire strength. It was already a terrifying matter that a half-step Great Sage Intermediate had this level of strength. Yi Shiwen knew that it was not just 4 realms gap between him and Blood Hangman, who was a Great Sage late. Most importantly, there was a great threshold of entering the Great Sage realm. Yet Yi Shiwen could make Blood Hangman feel threatened. If Yi Shiwen advanced further, how powerful would he be? Blood Hangman could hardly imagine. Blood Hangman could feel that his original guess was right now. Every time Yi Shiwen advanced, his power soared exponentially. It was even more terrifying now than it was at the beginning. This sword slash was like the whole force of Mount Tai, one slamming down. The powerful force shook to the point of tearing Blood Hangman's wrist muscles apart. The space between his forefinger and thumb cracked open and bled profusely in a split second. Blood Hangman was injured. He was really injured. This was the first time he was injured since the two battled. Previously, he kept blasting Yi Shiwen away, spitting out huge volumes of his chi and blood constantly like it was free. It made Blood Hangman feel exceptionally comfortable. Blood Hangman tortured people to death like that. The more tenacious his enemy was, the more interested he was in torturing and killing the enemy. The only way Blood Hangman felt his existence was to torture his enemies to death. But now, the situation was reversed completely. Not only was Yi Shiwen not injured, but Blood Hangman was injured in this collision instead. Even if it was only a minor injury, it was also a strong signal for Blood Hangman. A signal that the weighing scale was about to reverse. The young man in front of him was no longer the one who could let him beat casually. In the previous battles, the young man in front of him had no aspects that impressed him other than his persistence and tenacity. But now Yi Shiwen showed such a magnitude of strength. He had a breakthrough. He only broke through to half-step Great Sage late. And it was so powerful already? If someone mentioned this to Blood Hangman previously, he would definitely not believe it, and assumed that this person was talking nonsense. However, he believed it now. There were indeed such people in this world. Now it's my turn to crush you. Yi Shiwen sneered. He penetrated the sky in an instant, and charged towards Blood Hangman again. The sword slashed downward once more, and the majestic sword aura was almost going to tear apart the universe. Countless meteorites nearby turned into powder after encountering this sword aura. Kaboom! The sword aura slashed on the Blood Hangman's body, and a magnificent mushroom cloud actually rose. Terrifying power boiled in it, sweeping out an unimaginable energy storm. Blood Hangman stumbled and fell out of the storm. The bloody energy shield on his body was actually shattered. Countless resentful spirits were annihilated in this overpowering force. Although it was very cruel to them, it was not necessarily a bad thing for these resentful spirits who were locked up to return to the world. Blood Hangman no longer had the same calmness as before. His clothes were ragged, and his face was a bit pale. He looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. If Yi Shiwen was just lucky previously, then the blow made him really see the horrifying strength of Yi Shiwen clearly now. With the breakthrough to half-step Great Sage late, Yi Zaiwen's strength had surpassed him already. This was a scary thing for him, as he never thought that he would meet such an opponent. Without hesitation, Blood Hangman turned away almost immediately to flee into the Medicine King Valley. There was a Blood Lord of Great Sage minor mastery there. Even if Yi Shiwen was talented, he was not a match at all in comparison to Bloodlord who was in Great Sage Realm minor mastery. By then Blood Hangman could kill this strong enemy through Bloodlord. Oh no, Yi Shiwen. He's going to run away. Stop him. Yi Mo's screams resounded in Yi Zaiwen's mind. This experienced and far-sighted old demon had experienced many battles. Yi Mo went through countless times of battles which were more dangerous than any battle that Yi Shiwen had experienced. It could be said that he had also developed a pair of discerning eyes. He noticed Blood Hangman's intention to escape almost instantly. Yi Shiwen also reacted immediately, and he must not let Blood Hangman escape. Once Blood Hangman escaped, there would be no chance of beheading him again. Yi Shiwen was not sure if he could beat the Blood Lord in Medicine King Valley, even if he summoned Star Beast Avatar. The integration of Star Beast Avatar had come to the most critical time now, because Yi Shiwen had an abundance of wealth all of a sudden. So he didn't let the Blood Slave absorb the Star Beast spirit bit by bit as usual. Instead, Yi Shiwen intended to let it gobble up in one go. As long as the adult Star Beast Avatar's spirit could be gobbled up in one go, then the Blood Slave would also have an explosive growth to reach the Great Sage Great Perfection realm immediately. By that time, with Star Beast Avatar, he was truly invincible under the Transcendent Realm. As long as Yi Shiwen did not encounter a Transcendent Realm Master, then he could certainly escape even if he encountered any powerful enemy. Moreover, the most important thing was that by that time, Yi Shiwen could control Star Beast Avatar without countless elixirs to forcefully summon it. The reason why it was needed previously was because the Blood Slave itself did not have the ability to summon this underage Star Beast spirit. After swallowing the wisp of adult Star Beast spirit, Yi Shiwen suddenly had the matching ability and could be fully integrated into it, so he naturally no longer needed the elixirs. Because it was impossible to defeat Blood Lord even if Star Beast Avatar was summoned, so Yi Shiwen must kill Blood Hangman in the universe. One describing a very powerful person or object. Chapter 689 Beheaded in Cold Blood Murder. Thinking of leaving? Yi Shiwen sneered and immediately caught up. Although he used Blood Hangman as a whetstone to sharpen his skills, he was completely crushed and beaten. The feeling of being blown repeatedly made his belly bloated with fury. Only through annihilating the Blood Hangman would it then be worthy of the blood, and he just vomited out. Chong! With a loud swoosh, the sword lit half of the universe brightly. Yi Shiwen lifted the sword and slashed downward on the spot. When the Blood Hangman saw Yi Shiwen sealed up all of his retreat route with a sword, a hint of desperation suddenly flashed in his eyes. It was unknown as to how many people he had killed since he made his debut to earn his name as the Blood Hangman. Of course, with such a prestigious name, he would not prey on the weak and fear the strong. He did not know how many lives were shouldered by him. At this time, with all his retreat cut off, he was forced to be fierce. He understood that if he did not kill Yi Shiwen at this time, he would not escape. The battle was only for a moment, and perhaps would determine the outcome. If he could not kill Yi Shiwen, then maybe he could not even wait for the Blood Lord to rescue him. Up to now, there was no news from the Blood Lord at all. Obviously, the Blood Lord was preoccupied with several great sages in Medicine King Valley. It was impossible for him to receive help from the Blood Lord anytime soon. The blood-colored wave on him suddenly spread wildly. He really had to make his last attempt. At this moment, if he could not kill Yi Shiwen, he was left with a dead end. All the martial arts that he knew were being used and appeared behind him all at once, forming a strange phenomenon. A huge blood shadow formed behind him. This blood shadow was tens of feet in height. It was like a giant in the universe, or like a hill. There were many pairs of hands on the blood shadow. Each pair of hands were executing the lost technique of martial arts, all of which he obtained from years of butchering clans and beheading opponents. Each set of martial arts would be enough to shake the void, and all of them spread out from his hands. However, any one of these martial arts lost techniques was enough to shake up one area. He might need to use his full power to execute any of these techniques. The pressure on him would be unimaginable to execute so many techniques together. The chi in his body was not sufficient for him to use. At this time, he had fully manifested these martial arts. It was not his chi that was consumed, but his blood essence. The blood essence in his body was burning, and it was burning at an unimaginable speed. He saw how after Yi Zaiwen's breakthrough, there was an earth-shattering increase in his strength. If he could not kill Yi Shiwen with all his strength, then he would be killed by Yi Shiwen. In that case, he would rather go all out to kill Yi Shiwen. Although doing so would definitely leave a severe injury, it was better than dying in the hands of the ants that he had always looked down upon. I will let you meet your own demise. The blood hangman let out a mad roar as he was being forced to a dead end. Even if the dog was in a hurry, it would jump over the wall. 1. What's more, he was such a brutal murderer. The blood shadow behind him started rumbling, and as soon as he made a shot, he was struck by lightning. Budo's artistic conception was immersed in it. Although the blood hangman was cruel and psychologically distorted, his talents were not inferior compared to the gods in general. There was no doubt that he was a genius to train on his own to this level. At this moment, he released out all of his martial arts techniques and comprehension in full force to kill Yi Shiwen instantly. He had no choice. He could only survive if he killed Yi Shiwen. Yi Zaiwen's expression was solemn. When he looked at this situation, he understood that the blood hangman was already anxious and desperate. Come on, let me see your strongest moves. The fighting spirit in Yi Zaiwen's eyes were burning, and the golden divine power swept through his body instantly. Where is your confidence? Who do you think you are to kill me? At the beginning, he was almost like a rabbit surrounded by lions. He was ridiculed. Before being swallowed alive, he wanted to ridicule Yi Shiwen, just like an ant. Yi Shiwen should have let the blood hangman hold on to his frustrations for a long time, as the blood hangman was an extremely cruel man. From the blood hangman's martial arts, he knew that the blood hangman had killed countless numbers of people. The blood hangman should be annihilated. Burial sword. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, turned his sword into sword spirit, shining brightly to lit up half of the sky and faced the various martial arts and lost techniques from the blood hangman. Unlike the blood hangman, he did not show off all his own martial arts techniques. He merely manifested a huge long sword. One sword to break all techniques, this was his way. The popular saying was that one force to break all techniques. No matter what kind of method, what special abilities or what martial arts technique, all of it was nothing in the face of his absolute force. The long sword crossed the sky, splitting a huge rift, and instantly hit that huge blood shadow like an explosion. The long sword showed its abilities. Whatever kind of boxing techniques, whatever knife technique, whatever sword technique, whatever martial arts skills, all of it came charging towards him. However, under the path of the sword, all collapsed in a snap of a finger, unable to cause damage to his sword. Boom! The whole blood shadow was cut down to its knees by Yi Zaiwen's sword, and the blood shadow was shrieking and bellowing incessantly. This was the first time it was being used, and yet it was broken by Yi Shiwen. He was about to show his awesome power and rushed to attack Yi Shiwen, but he did not expect Yi Shiwen to be agile. He was beheaded within a millisecond of the sword movement. Buried earth sword. Boom! This sword stroke cut through the sky, as the tip of the sword sliced down towards the head and body of the blood shadow. One of his arms was immediately cut off. In an instant, blood spewed out like a river. How is it possible? The blood hangman could not believe it would end up like this. His strongest killer move, which he summoned after burning the Bodis essence blood, was utterly defeated by Yi Shiwen. The blood shadow was still bellowing like a wounded monster, looking up at the sky as if to tear down the sky. The blood shadow tried to stand up, but Yi Shiwen struck it with another stroke. Invincible sword. This sword was more horrible than before. Yi Shiwen concentrated all his power into this stroke. The qi in his body was completely depleted in an instant, and even the elixir in Tianyuan mirror was burning. All these combined to a group of spiritual energy pouring into Yi Zaiwen's body. Thrust. The tip of the sword shone like the dazzling light of the sun, with endless golden light, which almost covered the universe in an instant. The light pierced majestically through the vacuum and the places he went in the past. The endless blood wave spewing out of the blood shadow was also evaporated instantly by the tip of this majestic sword. Countless grievances without even a squeak were immediately dissipated. Pomp! Like the sound of knife cutting flesh without a loud bang, the sword tip sliced down the body of the blood shadow, dissipating him from head to toe. The sharp sword tip sliced through everything in its path. Tear! The whole blood shadow was beheaded in half on the spot. After being transformed into countless pus blood, it evaporated immediately, as if it had never appeared in the universe. "Ah, I don't deserve that," the blood hangman screamed. He was also split in half on the spot, along with the blood shadow. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly, and grabbed the soul of the blood hangman from the body that was cut in half in one big swoop. Yi Ziwen's sword was so sharp that even human souls would be instantly split into two halves. Much of the information was also cut into two halves, or otherwise fragmented. Even so, with the soul-searching method, one could still retrieve quite a lot of information. Yi Shiwen was not checking the blood hangman's soul on a whim, but he felt a little curious. How could the Blood Wolf Plunderer be so precise? He suddenly appeared here at this time to raid the place. Also, the most important thing was not this. The most important thing was that although Medicine King Valley was not a very strong sect with overwhelming strength, the main point was that he was from a sect cultivator centered on alchemy. Countless pellets were sold every day and countless warriors had benefited from Medicine King Valley. Once the snake did not die too, with the appeal of Medicine King Valley, the Blood Wolf Plunderer would not have an easy time. This was why Medicine King Valley could survive to this day. The reason was because in the countless years, there were too many elite warriors who had benefited from Medicine King Valley. Therefore, the Blood Wolf Plunderer wiped out a lot of powerful sects, but there were few records of them taking action against these sects cultivators centered on alchemy. However, after checking the memory of the Blood Hangman, Yi Shiwen was shocked because the Blood Wolf Plunderer was not a rootless sect. Behind them was actually the Emergence world. Even the Blood Lord and the Blood Hangman were disciples of the Emergence sect. It was just that a long time ago, they had broken off from the Emergence sect and formed the Blood Wolf Plunderer on their own. Slowly, they built up their prestige, but they were actually the disciples of Emergence sect. They were supported by the Emergence sect. So their cultivation ability grew so fast precisely because of the backing of the Emergence sect. So the Blood Wolf Plunderer could avert several major forces' joint strike. At the same time, part of the resources obtained by the Blood Wolf Plunderer from plundering over the past years were used to develop Blood Wolf Plunderer. Most of the resources had been turned over to the Emergence sect. Other powerful sects, although individually were far inferior to the Emergence sect, had also been developed for countless years with deep and terrible backgrounds and countless wealth. If the Emergence sect wanted to make a fortune by sweeping away these powerful sects, the accumulated wealth would be absolutely beyond imagination. It would not only be just thousands and millions worth of elixirs. When he saw all these, Yi Shiwen could not help but take a deep breath. It was no wonder that wherever the Blood Wolf Plunderer went, the place was totally annihilated, not a single life was spared and captives were never captured. The reason for this was to prevent the secrets from being leaked out. One dogs in a hurry would jump the wall. Those who were put on edge would make a desperate move. 2. The snake did not die. Nip the problem in the bud. Chapter 690. Take advantage of the chaos. The Blood Wolf Plunderer was notorious among the nearby Star region. They did all sorts of bad things with numerous sins. Everyone had seething discontent, and countless people were dying to the skin of the Blood Wolf Plunderer alive. If it wasn't because the Blood Wolf Plunderer managed to escape successfully every time, they would have already been directly eliminated by someone. It was completely conceivable how the Blood Wolf Plunderer was strongly hated by others. Their power even triggered an annihilation by the masters and overlord of the Meteor sect nearby. Although they had heavy losses that time, the Blood Wolf Plunderer still managed to escape. Eventually, no one wished to have any connections with such infamous people. Even the Emergence School, the Colossus in the depths of the stars, would lose countless hopes from people if they were found related to the Blood Wolf Plunderer. Although the fame of these Colossus were brought up through fighting, they would have a huge headache once everyone developed hatred out of jealousy and kept them in mind. Especially when the Blood Wolf Plunderers were so cruel. No one would believe in the Emergence School anymore if the people found out that the Blood Wolf Plunderer were from Emergence School. No one would want to cooperate with Emergence School. Even though the Emergence School wouldn't fall drastically, it would be impossible to grow and expand. Even if there was such a risk, Emergent School still did so. The only reason was because they believed that no one could be rich without illegal profit. He could earn faster money through plunder compared to saving through hard work. During the emergence of Blood Wolf Plunderer in these few thousands of years, trillions of elixir were sent to the Emergent School. It was definitely wealth approaching infinity, especially when the Blood Wolf Plunderer might only be one of them. There might be other forces that were supported in the same way. Those accumulation of wealth were unbelievably terrifying. More than 4 billion elixir fell into the hands of Yi Shiwen solely based on Blood Hangman. As the second master of the Blood Wolf Plunderer, even though most wealth was turned over to the sect after plundering so many sects, the small amount remaining was more than enough. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but to sigh in sorrow. Sure enough, no one could be rich without illegal profit. It would be good enough for an ordinary great sage, or even a master of the late great sage, to have 1 billion. Ordinary great sages couldn't even imagine 4 billion. Moreover, this was just a portion of his wealth. There were many more in his nest. Even Yi Shiwen was shocked about how rich he was. Even men like Yi Shiwen couldn't have so much wealth. However, Blood Hangman also did not know much as to why the Blood Wolf Plunderer suddenly attacked the Medicine King Valley. They only knew that it was the Emergent School's orders for them to rob the nearby cultivator centered on Alchemy's sect, and search to take all of their pellets. The Blood Wolf Plunderer would then disappear completely, and they would return to the Emergent School. After all, the Blood Wolf Plunderer would surely become public enemies after doing such acts. Perhaps the Meteor World would be really angry this time. They would not be able to calm the public anger if that did not wipe out the Blood Wolf Plunderer. The only vague news was that the Emergent School seemed to be planning on something big, and was constantly gathering various resources. Even those who were at the Star region wouldn't figure out what sort of grand plan was Emergent School planning, but Yi Shiwen almost immediately understood it. Perhaps it was related to Real Martial Domain. In the Real Martial Domain, it always seemed like a storm was lying ahead. The news that the Emergent School was about to attack the True Martial School was basically known everywhere. But there was only such news. The question of when the Emergent School would launch the attack and how big would the attack be had always been a mystery. However, Yi Shiwen found out that the Emergent School had spent a century to carry out this plan just by peeping at a segment of this whole plan. If not, they would not have to collect so many pellets and still search for it everywhere. The Emergent School had dominated the emergence world for countless years. Their profound accumulated concrete background had already indicated their pellet possession was at a great number beyond imagination. What kind of skirmish would instigate Emergent School to continue collecting pellets by any means? Once the war started, the pellets would definitely be spent endlessly, no matter for injuries, replenishment of chi, or to stimulate the potential. All kinds of pellets would be needed. It was not a joke to say that pellets would be spent just like flowing water. The Emergent School began to collect pellets by any means. Apparently, this was an enormous action in the eyes of the Emergent School. Yi Shiwen thought that nothing else apart from the attack on True Martial School would make Emergent School act like this. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but feel chills in his back. If it was really related to the attack on True Martial School, then the Emergent School would probably attack the True Martial School anytime soon based on the unscrupulous collection of pellets by the Blood Wolf Plunderer. It might even happen within the next few years. The entire Emergent School, a colossus-like force, would be able to fully mobilize in a few years' time. It would be a major problem on whether the True Martial School could resist the strong attack of the Emergent School. Yi Shiwen would like to hide far away if there was a choice, but he could not because he had brothers and friends in the True Martial School. Moreover, his parents, older brothers, older sisters, and the Yi family were in the Great Yu Empire. All these obstacles made Yi Shiwen unable to walk away just like this. Since he couldn't walk away, the only one way was to desperately strengthen his strength and survive the upcoming storm-like attack from the Emergent School. Yi Shiwen took a deep breath and realized that the truth did not relieve him. On the contrary, it only made him feel more depressed. Yi Shiwen, the Emergent School will be coming anyways. If you want to increase your strength in a short period of time, the best way is to get the Violet Limitless Chi Pellet. There will be a huge change in your situation if you break through to Great Sage, said Yemo. In fact, according to the idea of this big devil, there was absolutely no need for Yi Shiwen to stay. Supposingly, he should hide far away in such situations as his return would not be helpful. His strength was enough to deter his opponent on normal days, but it was worthless in the battle of the Colossus-like Emergence School and the True Martial School. Most importantly, the strength of Emergence School was a lot better than the True Martial School. In his mind, the True Martial School did not have any chance of winning. Since there was no chance of winning, it was only a matter of time before they were raised. It would be a dead end if Yi Shiwen stayed back, which was what he did not want to see. However, he knew Yi Zaiwen's character very well. He understood that based on Yi Zaiwen's character, it was impossible for him to really abandon those people and leave on his own. Therefore, he could only try everything possible to improve Yi Zaiwen's strength. The only way for Yi Shiwen to survive was to improve his own strength. However, he did not tell Yi Shiwen what he really hoped for. Actually, after the Blood Slave completely engulfed the spirit of the adult Star Beast, the Star Beast avatar could fully integrate into the body of the unmature Star Beast. By that time, they would be able to go straight to the Great Sage Great Perfection. There was hope to escape even if they met someone who's transcendently strong. This would be Yi Zaiwen's actual insurance per se. Otherwise, he would be useless even if he stepped into the Great Sage. And Yi Shiwen said and nodded. Knowing that the Emergence School might strike the True Martial School with a thunder blow, the only thought left in Yi Zaiwen's mind was just to madly increase his strength. If his strength was not strong enough, he would be crushed in the bombardment from the Emergence School. He urgently felt that his strength fell short by a large amount, and he must improve his strength in the shortest period of time. The Violet Limitless Chi Pellet was the most effective method now. No matter how useful the outcome would be to enter the Great Sage, he decided to just enter the Great Sage first. By having this thought, Yi Shiwen was not hesitant at this moment. His aura suddenly changed as he began the Aura Convergence martial art. He immediately became a Bloodwolf plunderer and rushed directly into the atmosphere of the Medicine King Valley planet. His Aura Convergence martial art was so marvelous that it made his several years of practice worthwhile. A general Bloodwolf plunderer would not be able to see through his disguise. He also believed that it was impossible for the Bloodlord to see through his disguise even if he walked in front of the Bloodlord. There was war everywhere as far as his eyes can see. The battles in the sky were basically drawn to rest at this moment. The sky was completely occupied by the Bloodwolf plunderer. In this situation without any foreign aid, the Medicine King Valley disciples' combat power was completely incomparable to the Bloodwolf plunderer who slaughters to end. Yi Shiwen descended all the way from the sky and landed in the Medicine King Valley. The battle in the Medicine King Valley station was still very fierce at this moment, but the Medicine King Valley disciple had already suffered series of defeats consecutively. There was simply no way to resist the Bloodwolf plunderer's attack. In the distance, the Bloodlord was surrounded by several great sages, and they were fighting madly in the mid-air. Neither the Bloodwolf plunderer nor the Medicine King Valley disciples dared to go close when great sage-level masters made a move. Otherwise, without any doubt, all of them would be shocked to death solely by the overpowering wind. There was an additional old great sage compared to when Yi Shiwen left, who was also a great sage intermediate peak and a great elder in Medicine King Valley. Together with Tian Butong, Qing Xuanzi, Yao Buping and Mu Jingya, a total of 5 great sage teamed up to attack Bloodlord. Although the Bloodlord was entangled for a while, he was quite calm even when he couldn't free himself immediately. However, these great sages were not able to pose a real threat to him. After all, the strength of the two parties was too big of a difference. Suddenly, the Bloodlord screamed. He found a flaw between the several people who teamed up. The spear instantly penetrated the sky like a blood dragon, and it appeared right before the great elder of the Medicine King Valley in a blink of the eye. The great elder of the Medicine King Valley was pierced directly. He was nailed directly to the ground with blood flowing all over. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.